Today we're breaking down exactly why being a UFC fighter isn't the dream people think it is. And with each point, it's only going to become more obvious just how brutal this job really is. Simply not worth it. The paycheck illusion. The financial structure tilts sharply toward the promotion. The UFC retains about 80 to 85% of total revenue, leaving roughly 15 to 20% to be split among the entire roster, a figure dramatically lower than the 50% revenue share seen in the NFL, NBA, or boxing's biggest promotions. The biggest shock for new UFC fighters isn't the punches, it's the pay. The UFC markets itself as the pinnacle of combat sports, with million-dollar stars like McGregor and Pereira front and center. But beneath that elite tier sits a roster where most fighters barely break even. Entry-level contracts typically pay $10,000 to show, $10,000 to win, and the company limits fighters to roughly 3 to 4 bouts per year, assuming they stay healthy. After taxes, management fees, coaching cuts, training camp expenses, and travel, many walk away with less than $5,000 per fight. Some even lose money. Unlike team sports, there's no base salary, no benefits, and no collective bargaining. It's a gig economy in gloves, where each bout is a one-off payday, and the dream job title replaces long-term security. The illusion works because visibility feels like wealth. Fighters believe fame will translate into income until the numbers hit their bank accounts. In truth, the UFC's model doesn't reward success. It rewards survival. You're not getting rich in the octagon. You're just fighting to stay on the payroll. Forever stuck. The contract trap. Signing with the UFC is supposed to mean you've made it, the moment a fighter graduates from the regional circuit to the world stage. But that first contract isn't a reward. It's a surrender of control. On paper, it's a multi-fight deal, but only one side has real power. The UFC can terminate a contract after any loss, or if a fighter underperforms. While the fighter is locked in until every bout is fulfilled, there's no negotiation, no exit clause, no freedom to compete elsewhere. The term exclusive rights sounds professional, but it really means career isolation. Fighters can't sign with other promotions, can't monetize their likeness independently, and can't negotiate sponsorships without UFC approval before the Reebok and Venom deals. Many fighters made more from sponsors than from their actual fight purse. The UFC eliminated that overnight, forcing every athlete into a uniform that pays a flat fee, a branding win for the company, a financial loss for the roster. Even the fine print on likeness rights tells the story. Once you sign, the UFC owns your image, your highlights, and your promotional footage forever. You can retire, fight elsewhere, or disappear entirely, and they'll still control how you appear in their media. The business model is clear. Fighters don't sign with the UFC, they sign to it. The organization owns the spotlight, the narrative, and the brand. The fighter simply rents their own body back for a paycheck. False hope. The bonus mirage. Performance bonuses are a long-standing feature of the UFC's pay structure, designed to reward exceptional performances and encourage fighters to compete with energy and aggression. Typically, awards such as Fight of the Night or Performance of the Night grant $50,000 bonuses distributed at the discretion of UFC leadership after each event. While the intent is to incentivize entertainment and effort, the subjective nature of the selection process means outcomes can vary. Bonuses are not tied to rankings or win-loss records, but to how a bout is perceived by the organization and audience. As a result, fighters often adopt higher risk styles to attract attention and improve their chances of earning these discretionary rewards. For lower-tier athletes, a single bonus can significantly influence annual income, creating a strong motivation to prioritize action over caution. This system allows the UFC to encourage excitement-driven competition without formally increasing base pay. From an educational standpoint, it illustrates how variable compensation models in combat sports can shape athlete behavior, promoting fan engagement, but also amplifying the physical risks that come with performance-based incentives. Bruised and battered, the health fallacy. The UFC maintains professional health and safety standards, including mandatory medical screenings, on-site physicians, and post-fight evaluations. However, its insurance coverage is event-based, meaning it primarily applies to injuries sustained during official bouts or activities within fight week. Injuries from training, sparring, or long-term physical wear typically fall outside that scope. This structure aligns with most professional combat sports, where athletes are classified as independent contractors rather than employees. Because of that, costs related to rehabilitation, scans, and elective surgeries are usually covered by the fighter, not the promotion. Chronic conditions, such as CTE, arthritis, or ligament damage, are managed individually once a fighter's active contract ends. Currently, there is no pension or long-term medical fund for retired fighters, though active athletes receive comprehensive care during sanctioned events. From a structural standpoint, the UFC ensures acute injury management and regulatory compliance, while long-term health planning remains the responsibility of the individual athlete, a standard arrangement across the combat sports industry. Completely deprived. The weight cuts. Cutting weight isn't technically mandated by the UFC, but the structure of its divisions pushes fighters into it. The gaps between weight classes are so wide that athletes are forced into an impossible choice: either fight heavier opponents and get outsized, or dehydrate themselves to compete at a lighter class. In practice, almost everyone chooses dehydration. A fighter walking around at 205 pounds has to either cut to middleweight at 185 or face light heavyweights who might rehydrate to 230. Those 20 to 30 pound swings are common. and the advantage they create on fight night can be decisive. Fighters like Alex Pereira, who has entered the cage nearly 30 pounds above the official limit, demonstrate how the system rewards extreme cutting, not natural weight maintenance. Physiologically, the toll is severe. Rapid dehydration strips electrolytes, shrinks plasma volume, and reduces the brain's cushioning fluid, making knockouts more likely and recovery slower. The kidneys, heart, and endocrine system all absorb the damage. Yet the UFC benefits from the spectacle. The tense weigh-ins, the last-minute drama, the face-offs that fuel social media, so while no one forces fighters to cut, the system makes it the only rational decision. You either suffer through dehydration or step into the cage against someone who didn't, someone 20 pounds heavier and just as skilled. It's not a rule, it's coercion by design. The UFC didn't invent weight cutting, but its structure ensures it will never stop. Spotlight effect, the fame illusion. Fame in the UFC projects the image of power, status, and influence, but in practice, it's a limited form of visibility rather than lasting celebrity. Fighters can gain millions of views and social media followers overnight, yet outside the MMA world, most remain relatively unknown. Unlike mainstream athletes tied to teams or leagues, UFC fighters don't have year-round exposure. Their fame peaks during fight week and fades quickly afterward. The organization's marketing model amplifies this effect. The brand promotes events and rivalries rather than individual legacies, meaning even top contenders are interchangeable within the narrative. The UFC controls broadcast footage, highlights, and promotional material, so fighters rarely own the content that makes them famous. Once their contract ends, that visibility disappears with it. As a result, UFC fame often functions as borrowed spotlight, powerful but temporary. Only a small number of fighters manage to convert it into independent recognition through personal branding, media presence, or ventures outside the cage. For most, notoriety begins and ends with the walkout music. The crowd remembers the fight, the company owns the moment. Never speak. The silence clause. Like most major sports organizations, the UFC includes confidentiality and conduct clauses in its fighter contracts. These provisions are designed to protect company operations, brand integrity, and sensitive business details. However, in practice, they also shape how fighters communicate publicly about pay, contracts, or internal matters. While fighters are not explicitly prohibited from speaking out, doing so can affect professional relationships and future opportunities within the organization. The UFC, as a privately managed promotion, controls media access, marketing visibility, and fight bookings, all of which influence an athlete's exposure and earning potential. Several fighters have publicly voiced concerns over pay or treatment, often at personal cost. Examples include Ali Akinta, Randy Couture, and Leslie Smith, who each experienced professional pushback after challenging company policies. From a broader perspective, this reflects a standard dynamic in entertainment-based sports. The organization manages the brand narrative, while athletes must balance self-expression with contractual obligations. It highlights the tension between corporate communication control and individual advocacy that exists throughout modern professional sports. A cartel business, the ultimate payoff. The UFC operates as a promotion-first enterprise, meaning its financial structure is built around event profitability and global brand growth, rather than athlete equity sharing. Fighter compensation, while often performance-based, represents a fraction of total operational spending compared to marketing, production, and distribution costs. This system prioritizes sustainability and scalability, ensuring events remain profitable while maintaining a deep roster of talent ready to compete. However, it also creates a competitive environment where most fighters are paid enough to participate consistently, but not enough to disengage from competition. The structure rewards persistence and marketability as much as skill. Economically, it reflects the same principle found in other entertainment industries. The brand holds the leverage, and participants operate within it. Fighters enter for the opportunity, exposure, and potential breakout success, but the financial ecosystem is designed to keep ambition high and replacement always possible. Over time, that balance between opportunity and dependency can work against the athletes themselves. The same system that keeps the machine running also keeps many fighters locked in cycles of financial pressure and physical risk long after the applause fades.
The best individual representative for every martial art in the UFC.
Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Representatives: BJ Penn, Royce Gracie, and Charles Oliveira. Bronze, BJ Penn. BJ Penn started training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in his teens in Hawaii and advanced faster than almost anyone in the sport, earning his black belt in a little over 3 years and becoming the first American to win a BJJ world title. That early intensive training built a fundamentals-driven style centered on posture breaking, hip angles, and flexible guard work that shut down passes before they even developed. In MMA, those habits showed up everywhere: smooth guard transitions, clean back takes during scrambles, and steady, controlled, positional advancement. His 7 submission wins came from pure, high-percentage jiu-jitsu, not athletic shortcuts. Penn earns the bronze because he's one of the clearest examples of how a deep technical foundation in BJJ can directly control and finish UFC-level fights. Silver, Royce Gracie. Royce Gracie grew up immersed in jiu-jitsu from childhood, training under the Gracie family system that had been developed, tested, and refined for decades in Brazil. By the time he entered the UFC, he had already spent his entire life practicing the core mechanics of traditional BJJ: closed guard retention, posture breaking, clinch entries, and incremental positional advancement. That lifelong training is what allowed him to walk into UFC 1 and submit 3 opponents in a single night using nothing but pure technique. He showed the world that leverage, frames, and energy-efficient mechanics could neutralize fighters who were bigger, stronger, and more athletic. Every element of his game, controlling reactions, advancing only when secure, and finishing with the simplest available submission, came directly from years of drilling the same fundamentals. Gracie earns the silver because he proved, on a global stage, that lifelong jiu-jitsu training wasn't just effective, it was essential. He forced every future fighter to understand the ground game just to survive. Gold, Charles Oliveira. Charles Oliveira earns the gold medal because he represents the fully evolved form of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in modern MMA. He holds the UFC record for 16 submission wins, and his style is built around non-stop offense, scrambles, chain attacks, and immediate pressure rather than slow, methodical setups. One of the clearest signs of his impact is how fighters actively avoid entering his guard. Even when they drop him with strikes, they hesitate to follow him to the mat because they know that a dominant punching position against most fighters becomes a liability against Oliveira. His guard is an attack platform, triangles, arm bars, hip-high sweeps, and back-take triggers all firing the moment someone commits. Combine that with his devastating front choke game, seatbelt control, and relentless hand fighting on the back, and you get a style that forces opponents to choose between giving him space or giving him their neck. His performances against Michael Chandler, Dustin Poirier, and Justin Gaethje show how modern BJJ can overwhelm even elite strikers. Oliveira isn't just using jiu-jitsu, he's showing its peak form in today's UFC, which is why he's the gold medal representative. Wrestling. Representatives: Henry Cejudo, Khabib Nurmagomedov, and Daniel Cormier. Wrestling. Bronze. Henry Cejudo. Henry Cejudo began wrestling at 4 years old and spent his entire youth competing at the highest levels, eventually becoming an Olympic gold medalist, the peak of the sport. That lifelong foundation built the habits that define his MMA wrestling. Clean level changes, precise timing, and chain wrestling drilled for decades. When he moved into the UFC, he adapted those freestyle skills into cage wrestling, using underhooks, foot sweeps, and mat returns to control every position. His wins over Demetrius Johnson and Marlon Moraes showed how Olympic fundamentals translate directly into MMA success. Cejudo earns the bronze because he proved that deep, lifelong wrestling training can dictate both pace and geography inside the cage. Silver. Khabib Nurmagomedov. Khabib grew up training wrestling, judo, and sambo in Dagestan from the time he could walk, developing a grappling base shaped by decades of high-level Eastern European training. That lifelong immersion created the hybrid style that made him so dominant in MMA, a blend of freestyle entries, sambo throws, and relentless cage wrestling pressure. His system wasn't built on single takedowns, it was built on chains. If one shot failed, he flowed immediately into trips, mat returns, leg rides, and wrist rides until opponents simply couldn't stand anymore. Once he secured top position, his trademark cross-wrist control shut down striking completely and opened safe, high-percentage ground and pound. His performances against McGregor, Poirier, and Gaethje showed that he didn't just use wrestling, he controlled every second of the fight with it. Khabib earns the silver because he turned lifelong grappling training into the most suffocating, systematic wrestling style the UFC has ever seen. Gold. Daniel Cormier. Daniel Cormier started wrestling in high school and committed his life to the sport, becoming a 2-time Olympian, an Olympic team captain, and one of the most accomplished American wrestlers ever to enter MMA. That decades-long foundation built a style rooted in pure folk style and freestyle fundamentals, hand fighting, level changes, high crotch lifts, and chain attacks drilled until they were automatic. When he transitioned to the UFC, those same habits turned into one of the most complete wrestling systems in heavyweight and light heavyweight history. His clinch game, underhooks, collar ties, body locks, let him throw and control fighters far bigger than him, while his ability to blend striking and wrestling made his transitions almost impossible to read. Wins over Stipe Miocic, Anthony Johnson, and Alexander Gustafsson showed how effortlessly he could dictate where the fight took place. And now, as a coach and analyst, Cormier teaches those same fundamentals to the next generation, breaking down entries, finishes, and cage control with the same clarity he used in the cage. He earns the gold because he represents the purest, most complete translation of lifelong American wrestling into championship-level MMA success, both as a fighter and as an educator of the sport. Muay Thai. Representatives: Jose Aldo, Anderson Silva, and Edson Barboza. Bronze. Jose Aldo. Jose Aldo began training striking as a teenager in Brazil, eventually committing himself fully to Muay Thai and developing the balance, posture, and hip-driven power that define the style. Years of drilling those fundamentals shaped his MMA identity. Explosive low kicks, a tight defensive guard, and clean pivots that let him control distance and punish pressure. In the clinch, he used classic Thai frames and knees to shut down wrestlers trying to close the gap. Aldo earns the bronze because he proved that traditional Muay Thai technique, stance discipline, timing, and efficient power could dominate at the highest level of MMA. Silver. Anderson Silva. Anderson Silva started training Muay Thai in Brazil as a young teenager and spent years sharpening the fundamentals, balance, weight shifting, clinch control, and precision striking that later defined his MMA career. That long technical apprenticeship is what allowed him to blend traditional Thai weapons with elite timing and deception. His Muay Thai clinch became one of the most dangerous positions in UFC history, using frames, collar ties, and perfectly timed knees to dismantle opponents like Rich Franklin. Outside the clinch, Silva used classic Thai mechanics: clean hips, sharp elbows, steady posture, but layered them with feints, rhythm changes, and angle shifts that came from decades of striking experience. He earns the silver because he showed how a lifetime of Muay Thai training, combined with tactical creativity, can turn stand-up fighting into a complete championship-level system in MMA. Gold. Edson Barboza. Edson Barboza earns the gold medal for Muay Thai because he represents the purest and most technically faithful version of Thai striking in the UFC. Unlike hybrid stylists, Barboza relies almost entirely on Muay Thai structure, stance discipline, hip rotation, and clean whip-like mechanics to generate fight-changing power. His kicking arsenal is textbook: low kicks that deaden legs, body kicks that shut down cardio, and lightning fast switch and wheel kicks that come straight from traditional Thai sequencing. Fighters hesitate to pressure him because every step forward risks eating a kick they can't absorb. Barboza also uses classic Muay Thai defensive tools: checks, teep variations, lateral pivots, and a tight high guard to control range and pace. His highlight reel finishes against Dan Hooker, Beneil Dariush, and Terry Atim show how he punishes aggression with timing and precision rather than brawling. In terms of pure Muay Thai fundamentals, applied directly to MMA speed and movement, no one has done it more cleanly, more consistently, or more fearsomely. That's why Barboza earns the gold medal as the premier Muay Thai representative in the UFC. Boxing. Representative, bronze. Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz grew up in Stockton, where street fighting and sparring and boxing gyms were basically part of daily life, and that raw experience sat right on top of the formal boxing training he started as a teen. Those early years built the pressure-heavy, volume-first style he carried into the UFC. Long jabs, slap-trap combinations, and non-stop forward pace. His reach and cardio let him throw when others slowed, while his hand fighting, from both the streets and the gym, opened clean lanes for his straight punches. Diaz earns the bronze because he proved that real boxing fundamentals, sharpened by real-world toughness, can dictate the rhythm of a fight through accuracy, pressure, and endurance. Silver. Max Holloway. Max Holloway earns the silver medal for boxing because he brought the most complete volume boxing system the UFC has ever seen. As a former featherweight champion with record-breaking striking numbers, Holloway uses pure boxing fundamentals: feints, level changes, angle cuts, and stance switches to overwhelm opponents without relying on one-shot power. His jab sets everything up, and his ability to layer combinations, body shots, uppercuts, hooks, and straight counters keeps opponents guessing from bell to bell. Holloway's real weapon is pacing. He increases output as the fight goes on, forcing opponents into defensive shells where his accuracy climbs. His performance against Calvin Kattar, where he landed at will while slipping punches mid-combination, showed how refined his boxing has become. Holloway doesn't take gold only because another fighter represents a more power-oriented, technically complete boxing style, but his precision, volume, and championship success make him the clear silver medal representative for boxing in the UFC. Gold. Dustin Poirier. Although close and highly debated between him and Max, Dustin Poirier earns the gold medal for boxing because he brings the most technically complete blend of power, precision, and defense the UFC has ever seen. As a former interim lightweight champion, Poirier's southpaw fundamentals, sharp jabs, tight crosses, check hooks, and smooth pivots let him stay in the pocket without losing defensive responsibility. A key part of that system is his unique high, shell-like guard, a compact defensive frame that absorbs shots on the forearms, funnels strikes into predictable angles, and sets up his signature counters. This guard allows him to stand directly in front of elite punchers, draw their attacks, and fire back with combinations that carry real knockout power. Poirier layers classic boxing concepts: angle cuts, body work, stance shifts, and hand traps, with subtle slips and shoulder rolls that keep him dangerous even mid-exchange. His performances against Conor McGregor and Justin Gaethje highlight how his guard, timing, and shot selection work under pressure, turning firefights into technical showcases. In terms of pure boxing applied to MMA, offense, defense, adaptability, and finishing ability, no one does it more completely, which is why Poirier earns the gold medal for boxing in the UFC. Kickboxing. Representatives: Mirko Cro Cop, Israel Adesanya, and Alex Pereira. Bronze. Mirko Cro Cop. Mirko Cro Cop developed his striking through years of elite K1 kickboxing, logging hundreds of rounds against world-class heavyweights before ever entering MMA. That education built a technically pure style centered on kickboxing fundamentals: balanced stance, efficient footwork, and tightly sequenced punch-to-kick combinations. His signature high kick wasn't just raw power. It came from classic Dutch-style mechanics, using straight punches to force a guard reaction, lateral steps to angle off, and a whip-like hip rotation to land clean. In MMA, that structure allowed him to control distance and punish forward pressure with precision. Cro Cop earns the bronze because he showed how a deep technical kickboxing foundation, built through years of drilling and high-level competition, translates directly into fight-ending power in the UFC. Silver. Israel Adesanya. Israel Adesanya spent years developing his striking through an unusually active kickboxing career, often fighting weekly across regional and international circuits, which gave him thousands of live reps in timing, distance, and shot selection. That volume of experience built his signature fundamentals: feints that test reactions, stance switches that hide kicking angles, and rhythm changes that break an opponent's timing. His defense, footwork, and countering ability come straight from classic kickboxing education: balanced posture, controlled weight transfer, and a deep understanding of how opponents commit to strikes. In the UFC, he applies those fundamentals by setting traps, drawing a step, exposing a target, and punishing it instantly with counters or calf kicks, pulled directly from traditional kickboxing sequencing. Adesanya earns the silver because he demonstrated how a long, high-level kickboxing background can create one of the most technically layered and deceptive striking systems ever used in MMA. Gold. Alex Pereira. Once again, highly debated between him and Izzy, Alex Pereira's striking is the product of more than a decade of structured, high-level kickboxing training, culminating in 2 Glory World titles, a clear marker of technical mastery. His style is built on classic Dutch fundamentals: balanced footwork, tight punching kicking combinations, and efficient weight transfer that increases power without sacrificing stability. A key example is his left hook, which works because of mechanically sound details. He uses shoulder feints to draw reactions, inside hand control to clear the guard, and a short stance adjustment that aligns his hips for maximum force. Pereira also applies kickboxing principles in sequence: calf kicks to limit mobility, body kicks to tax the guard, and step-in knees to punish forward movement. In MMA, these fundamentals remain effective because they rely on timing, angle management, and predictable defensive patterns rather than large gloves or ring-specific tactics. His finishes of Sean Strickland and Israel Adesanya illustrate how disciplined kickboxing technique, developed through years of repetition, translates directly to fight-ending efficiency in the UFC. Judo. Representatives: Hector Lombard, Cairo Parisian, and Ronda Rousey. Bronze. Hector Lombard. Hector Lombard's foundation comes from years of elite judo training, culminating in an Olympic career built on balance, grip fighting, and explosive hip and leg throwing mechanics. Although MMA lacks the GE grips that judo traditionally relies on, Lombard and other judokas who transitioned to MMA adapted those same principles by using overhooks, underhooks, wrist control, and collar tie variations to create the same leverage points that allowed him to hit classic judo throws, hip tosses, inside trips, Kosoto-style reaps, directly from clinch positions most fighters treated as neutral. His ability to break posture, redirect momentum, and land in dominant top positions came from thousands of hours of structured judo drilling. Lombard earns the bronze because he demonstrated how core judo mechanics still function in MMA when you understand how to replace JGA grips with MMA legal tie-ups. Silver. Cairo Parisian. Cairo Parisian grew up training high-level judo and became the first UFC fighter to show that traditional judo technique could work consistently in MMA. During his run as a perennial top 10 welterweight, he used classic throws, harai goshi, uchi mata, kosoto gari, directly from overhooks and clinch ties that most opponents weren't prepared to counter. His success came from timing and body connection, closing distance, breaking posture, and redirecting momentum instead of relying on strength. Parisian also linked his throws to immediate transitions into dominant positions and submission threats, giving him a unique edge in a wrestler-heavy era where most fighters were expecting shots, not upper body attacks. He earns the silver because he proved that pure judo fundamentals could not only survive in the UFC, but serve as a reliable and effective control system against elite competition. Gold. Ronda Rousey. Ronda Rousey's style came from a lifetime in high-level judo, starting in childhood and culminating in an Olympic bronze medal, proof of her mastery of balance, timing, and upper body throws. Those decades of technical development translated directly into MMA, where her entries, hip throws, and foot sweeps worked because her fundamentals were sharper than anyone she faced. Her signature sequence: close distance, secure upper body control, execute a clean throw, and transition instantly into the armbar, was the result of thousands of hours spent drilling the same mechanics, off-balancing the opponent, rotating through the hips, and landing already positioned to isolate an arm. What set her apart was efficiency. She didn't rely on strength, she relied on timing, leverage, and seamless transitions that left opponents no chance to recover. Rousey earns the gold because she delivered the most technically polished and consistently effective use of judo the UFC has ever seen, demonstrating how a lifelong foundation in the art can produce fast, repeatable, fight-ending results. Karate. Representatives: Robert Whittaker, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, and Lyoto Machida. Bronze. Robert Whittaker. Robert Whittaker began training karate as a child in Australia, developing the wide stance, linear footwork, and blitz-style entries that define traditional karate movement. Over years of training, he learned how to use range, angles, and chambered kicks to control distance and dictate engagement. When he transitioned to MMA, those same fundamentals, quick in and out movement, sudden burst attacks, and long-range kicking, became key parts of his striking system. By pairing that karate base with modern boxing and elite takedown defense, he created a hybrid style built on timing and distance distance management rather than pure power. Whitaker earns the bronze because he showed how early technical karate training can be adapted into an effective championship-level striking style in the UFC. Silver, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Stephen Thompson earns the silver medal for karate because he represents the purest, most technically faithful version of traditional point karate striking in MMA. Across his UFC run, he's beaten elite strikers and former champions, including Robert Whitaker, Jeff Neal, Vicente Luque, and Johnny Hendricks, using classic karate mechanics, wide stances, in-and-out movement, blitz attacks, and perfectly timed intercepting counters. His side kicks, hook kicks, and straight-line entries allow him to control range with surgical precision, forcing opponents to step into his setups instead of dictating the pace themselves. Wonderboy's footwork and defensive discipline make him one of the hardest fighters to hit clean, and his ability to frustrate and outmaneuver high-level strikers has kept him at the top of the division for more than a decade. He doesn't take gold only because another fighter carried karate all the way to UFC gold, but Thompson's purity, longevity, and high-level wins make him the clear silver medal representative for karate in the UFC. Gold, Lyoto Machida. Lyoto Machida earns the gold medal for karate because he brought the most complete, championship-level expression of Shotokan karate into the UFC. As a former light heavyweight champion who stayed near the top for years, Machida became one of the most feared and hardest fighters to figure out. Opponents spent entire camps trying to close distance safely because every step forward risked running into his counter left straight, his front kick, or a perfectly timed knee. His bladed stance, linear footwork, and rhythm-based counters turned classic karate principles into real MMA weapons. Machida fought with exceptional intelligence, constantly shifting tempo, using feints to freeze opponents, and forcing them to overcommit before punishing their mistakes. His knockout wins over Rashad Evans, Randy Couture, and Thiago Silva proved that pure karate mechanics could dominate elite competition. With championship pedigree, elite longevity, and a style that opponents genuinely feared, Machida stands as the definitive gold medal representative for karate in the UFC. MMA representatives Demetrius Johnson, George St. Pierre, and John Jones. Bronze, Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson. Demetrius Johnson built his skill set through years of structured training across every major discipline, striking, wrestling, and submissions, developing one of the most technically complete foundations in MMA. His game is defined by seamless transitions, striking combinations that flow directly into takedown entries, scrambles that turn into positional advances, and submissions that appear the moment an opponent gives space. Those habits come from consistent, high-repetition training focused on timing, movement, and efficiency rather than raw strength. In the UFC, that technical fluency allowed him to dominate every phase of the fight despite size and reach disadvantages. Johnson earns the bronze because he represents how a deeply trained, all-around skill set, built over years of disciplined practice, creates one of the most complete MMA styles ever seen. Silver, George St. Pierre. George St. Pierre earns the silver medal for MMA because he represents one of the most complete and strategically sound fighters the sport has ever produced. As a two-division UFC champion with 9 title defenses, GSP built his entire style around mixing disciplines seamlessly, using a sharp jab to control distance, explosive double legs to dictate where the fight took place, and top control built on precision rather than brute force. His ability to game plan was unmatched. He neutralized specialists by beating them at their own strengths, out-wrestling wrestlers like Josh Koscheck, out-striking strikers like Dan Hardy, and out-grappling grapplers like Matt Hughes. GSP's disciplined footwork, impeccable timing, and ability to blend striking, wrestling, and submissions into a single unified system make him one of the most effective all-around fighters in history. He only misses gold because another athlete represents an even more unpredictable and diverse MMA skill set. But GSP's mastery and championship resume make him the clear silver medal representative for MMA. Gold, John Jones. John Jones became the most complete fighter in MMA through years of training that blended wrestling, striking, and submissions into a single, adaptable system. From a young age, he built a strong wrestling foundation, then layered in kickboxing, clinch work, and grappling in a way that emphasized timing, positioning, and efficiency over brute force. His long reach and stance diversity allowed him to control range, while his wrestling fundamentals, level changes, body lock variations, and top control let him dictate where exchanges happened. In close, he used elbows and frame-based clinch mechanics straight out of Greco-Roman principles, and on the ground, he applied sound grappling fundamentals to maintain control while opening up strikes or submissions. What makes Jones stand out educationally is adaptability. He consistently modified his approach mid-fight based on an opponent's strengths, turning wrestlers into strikers, strikers into grapplers, and specialists into one-dimensional fighters. He earns the gold because he represents the highest expression of well-rounded MMA training, range management, positional awareness, and multidisciplinary technique applied with consistency at the highest levels of competition. In today's video, I will be explaining every UFC fighter's nickname so that you're no longer confused when Bruce Buffer presents your favorite fighter in the octagon. The Notorious. Conor McGregor's nickname, The Notorious, is a self-selected title directly influenced by the rapper The Notorious B.I.G. Rather than receiving it from teammates or coaches, McGregor adopted it early in his career because the rapper's image, confidence, showmanship, and confrontational charisma aligned with how he wanted to present himself in combat sports. The choice was intentional, a marketing tool and an identity marker that helped distinguish him in a crowded field. And as McGregor's profile grew, the nickname exploded as a consistent
Thanks for
part of his
watching
brand,
today's video.
reinforcing
If you enjoyed,
his public
please like,
persona,
subscribe,
and adding to
and
the
hit the bell for
unmistakable
more.
recognition.
Also,
that
please
followed
comment
him
any
into the
videos
UFC.
you would like to see
Stylebender.
next, and
Israel
I'll be sure to
Adesanya
use your
created
guys'
the nickname
ideas in the coming
Stylebender
videos.
as a direct reference to Avatar, The Last Airbender, reflecting his interest in anime and the idea of mastering multiple forms. The name highlights his approach to striking, where he blends techniques from kickboxing, boxing, and MMA with precision and variety. By choosing the nickname himself, Adesanya framed his identity around technical versatility rather than brute force. Over time, Stylebender has become a shorthand for his emphasis on creativity, timing, and fluid movement inside the cage. Boars. Khamzat Chimaev's nickname, Boars, comes from the Chechen word for wolf, a symbol closely tied to bravery, strength, and loyalty in Chechen culture. The name wasn't created as marketing. It reflects a cultural identity he grew up with and a personality trait his community values. In Chechnya, the wolf is also associated with resilience and readiness for conflict, traits that match Chimaev's aggressive, pressure-heavy fight style. As he rose in MMA, Boars became the defining label for his approach. Direct, relentless, and rooted in his heritage. Poatan. Alex Pereira's nickname Poatan comes from the Tupi language and translates to stone hands. It was given to him by his first kickboxing coach, who recognized both Pereira's indigenous heritage and his unusually heavy punching power. The nickname emphasizes a defining technical attribute, his ability to generate knockout force with minimal windup. Over time, Poatan became closely tied to his striking identity, reinforced by the stone-pebble tattoos on his hands that reference the name directly. El Matador. Ilia Topuria's nickname, El Matador, developed early in his MMA career and draws directly from Spanish bullfighting imagery. The reference highlights traits valued in a matador: timing, precision, and composure under pressure, which aligned with how coaches viewed his striking approach. Although he briefly experimented with rebranding to La Leyenda, the legend, fan response favored the original name, and he reverted quickly. Today, El Matador functions as a technical descriptor rather than a dramatic persona, emphasizing his ability to control exchanges and counter opponents with accuracy similar to a matador facing a bull. The Machine. Merab Davalishvili's nickname, The Machine, originated in the gym, not in marketing. A teammate noticed his ability to train at a pace most fighters couldn't match, constant takedown attempts, non-stop scrambles, and high-volume cardio sessions, and labeled him a machine because he didn't slow down. The name captured a measurable attribute of his style: sustained pressure over long durations rather than explosive bursts. As Davalishvili advanced in MMA, The Machine became an accurate shorthand for his work rate, wrestling-focused approach, and endurance-driven strategy inside the cage. The Highlight. Justin Gaethje's nickname, The Highlight, was adopted because of the unusually high action rate in his early career. Nearly every fight ended in a knockout, a brawl, or a dramatic momentum swing. Coaches, commentators, and promoters began referring to him this way because his bouts consistently produced footage suitable for promotional reels. The name reflects a measurable pattern in his style: forward pressure, high striking output, and a willingness to trade even at personal risk. As he moved from WSOF to the UFC, The Highlight became an accurate descriptor of both his fight mechanics and his entertainment value. Sugar. Sean O'Malley's nickname Sugar was given by one of his early coaches in Montana, who described his movement and striking as sweet to watch. The name was selected to reflect style rather than personality, specifically his timing, footwork, and clean shot placement. O'Malley was initially offered the nickname The Spider, but he rejected it to avoid comparisons to Anderson Silva. As his career progressed, Sugar became part of his branding, aligning with his emphasis on fluid offense, showmanship, and visually distinctive striking mechanics. Sexual Chocolate. Before John Jones became known universally as Bones, he briefly carried the nickname Sexual Chocolate inside his training circle. The name came from teammates who used it jokingly during his early MMA development, referencing the pro wrestling character made famous by Mark Henry. It wasn't connected to his fighting style or public persona, and Jones never adopted it professionally. As his reputation grew and his lanky frame stood out in wrestling rooms and local circuits, Bones replaced it entirely. Sexual Chocolate remains a short-lived, informal label from his early gym environment rather than a recognized career nickname. Iron. Michael Chandler's nickname Iron reflects qualities observed throughout his wrestling and MMA career: durability, work rate, and a pressure-heavy style built on conditioning. The name was adopted during his rise in Bellator, where coaches and commentators highlighted his ability to maintain pace through extended grappling and high-intensity striking exchanges. Along with that, Chandler always looked up to Mike Tyson, and being named Michael, he only found it fitting to use the same nickname. Unlike flashier nicknames, Iron functions as a straightforward descriptor of his physical resilience and training habits. When Chandler transitioned to the UFC, the nickname carried over easily because it aligned with the measurable attributes of his competition style: explosiveness, grit, and sustained effort in high-pressure scenarios. Du Bronx. Charles Oliveira's nickname, Du Bronx, comes from the neighborhood where he grew up in Guarujá, São Paulo. Locals referred to the area as the Bronx because of its high crime rates and tough living conditions, drawing a comparison to the reputation of the Bronx in New York decades earlier. Early in his career, event announcers and training partners identified him as Charles from the Bronx, which was eventually shortened into Du Bronx in Portuguese. The nickname serves as a geographic marker rather than a comment on his fighting style, highlighting his origins and the socioeconomic environment he came from before becoming a UFC champion. The Reaper. Robert Whittaker adopted the nickname The Reaper early in his UFC career to represent the qualities he valued most in his approach to competition: discipline, precision, and a composed finishing instinct. The name was intentionally chosen for its association with finality and effectiveness rather than theatrics. Although fans later created the alternate nickname Bobby Knuckles, Whittaker kept The Reaper as his official identity because it aligned more closely with his technical, methodical style. Over time, the nickname became a concise descriptor of his strategic pressure, clean shot selection, and ability to take over fights through consistency rather than spectacle. The Diamond. Dustin Poirier's nickname, The Diamond, was given early in his amateur career to describe how he responded under pressure, performing better as the intensity increased. The reference comes from the idea that diamonds form through extreme force, paralleling Poirier's ability to absorb damage, recover, and regain momentum in difficult fights. The nickname isn't tied to a specific moment or coach, but developed naturally as observers noticed this pattern across multiple bouts. As Poirier advanced through the lightweight division, the Diamond became an accurate shorthand for his durability, composure, and consistent improvement against higher-level opposition. The Spider. Anderson Silva's nickname, The Spider, was inspired by comparisons to Spider-Man, largely due to his long limbs, rangy frame, and fluid defensive movement. Coaches and training partners began using it as his style developed, particularly his ability to control distance, slip strikes, and counter with precision from unusual angles. The name stuck because it accurately described technical characteristics of his fighting approach: evasiveness, unpredictability, and the ability to create openings using reach and timing. As Silva established one of the most effective striking games in MMA history, the Spider became one of the sport's most recognizable nicknames, tied directly to his movement patterns and in-cage control. Rocky. Leon Edwards' nickname Rocky developed early in his UK regional career and serves two practical purposes. It ties to his given name, Leon, and it reflects the underdog trajectory that defined his early life and fighting path. Coaches and training partners used it informally because of his steady, grind-oriented style and his ability to persevere through setbacks. The name gained broader recognition as Edwards accumulated wins without the promotional push, typically given to rising contenders. After his late-round knockout of Kamaru Usman, Rocky became even more closely associated with his competitive identity, symbolizing persistence, recovery under pressure, and long-term resilience, rather than a dramatic persona. The Eagle. Khabib Nurmagomedov's nickname The Eagle is directly tied to Dagestani national symbolism. The eagle represents strength, resilience, and dominance over the Caucasus Mountains, traits that carry cultural significance in the region. Khabib selected the nickname himself to highlight that heritage, rather than to describe a specific technical trait. Over time, it also became associated with his grappling control and suffocating top-pressure approach, making the eagle a blend of cultural identity and competitive consistency. The Great. Alexander Volkanovski adopted the nickname The Great as a direct reference to his mixed Macedonian Greek heritage, echoing the historical figure Alexander the Great. The name marks both cultural identity and competitive ambition, replacing his earlier gym nickname, the Hulk, which focused mainly on his strength and stocky build. As Volkanovski shifted toward a more technical, strategic fighting style, the Great became a better reflection of his approach, precision, adaptability, and long-term dominance. Over time, it has served as both a cultural acknowledgement and a performance-based label for his championship run. Big Tom. Tom Aspinall's nickname, Big Tom, is a straightforward reference to his size and physical presence for a modern heavyweight. The label emerged naturally in UK MMA circles, where commentators and teammates used it to distinguish him from smaller training partners and emphasize his frame without tying it to any specific technical trait. While simple, the nickname reflects a consistent aspect of his competitive profile, being a heavyweight who combines size with unusual speed and mobility. Over time, Big Tom has remained an accurate, practical identifier rather than a stylized persona. GSP/Rush. Georges St-Pierre uses two nicknames that reflect different stages of his career. GSP is simply an initialism that became his standard promotional identity, widely used because of its clarity and professionalism. Rush, however, originated early on when St-Pierre was known for fast, aggressive openings and quick finishes. The nickname referenced his ability to overwhelm opponents with athletic bursts before shifting toward a more tactical, risk-managed style in his championship years. Together, the two names mark the evolution of his career, from explosive prospect to methodical, high IQ champion. Blessed. Max Holloway's nickname Blessed emerged early in his UFC career when coaches and training partners began highlighting how quickly he was progressing and how often he capitalized on opportunities. After several strong performances and bonus-earning wins, a coach remarked that Holloway was blessed, referring to both his rapid development and his grounded, composed attitude toward success. The name represents mindset rather than aggression or technique, emphasizing consistency, discipline, and gratitude. Over time, Blessed became his primary identifier, aligning with his professional conduct and long-term rise in the featherweight division. The Nigerian Nightmare. Kamaru Usman adopted the nickname the Nigerian Nightmare to highlight both his heritage and the difficulty opponents face preparing for his style. The name emphasizes his Nigerian roots while also pointing to the sustained pressure, clinch control, and wrestling-heavy pace he built his career around. It was used consistently throughout his rise to the title because it captured how challengers described him: physically demanding, strategically disciplined, and difficult to overcome across 5 rounds. The Predator. Francis Ngannou's nickname, The Predator, was selected to emphasize the core attributes that defined his rise in heavyweight MMA: size, athletic explosiveness, and exceptional knockout power. The name aligns with the way opponents and analysts described his striking threat: high impact, forward pressured, and capable of ending fights with a single exchange. Rather than referencing heritage or personality, the nickname functions as a technical marker, highlighting his ability to create danger in minimal time. As Ngannou accumulated some of the most powerful knockouts in UFC history, the Predator became a fitting shorthand for his efficiency and physical dominance. The Beast Incarnate. Brock Lesnar carried the Beast Incarnate directly from his professional wrestling persona into MMA, where it served as both a promotional identity and an accurate reflection of his physical profile. The nickname emphasized traits that translated cleanly across sports: size, strength, explosive speed, and a rare combination of powerlifting and collegiate-level wrestling credentials. Unlike performance-based nicknames that emerged from gym culture, the Beast Incarnate functioned as a branding tool, highlighting Lesnar's crossover appeal and marketability. In the UFC, it became shorthand for his aggressive style and the athletic advantages that defined his heavyweight run. BJP/Denisa. Yuri Prohaska has used 2 main nicknames in his career, each coming from different stages of his development. BJP is simply a set of initials used during his early fighting years before he adopted a more distinctive identity. Denisa, on the other hand, originated as an inside joke at his Czech gym. Teammates gave him the light-sounding name ironically, contrasting his intense training style and unusual personality. Over time, Prohaska leaned into the contrast, and Denisa became part of his unconventional, philosophical image, rather than a reflection of fighting mechanics. Junior/Scarface. Jose Aldo has used 2 nicknames, each tied to different parts of his background. Junior is a long-standing Brazilian nickname given to him in childhood, used widely by family, teammates, and early regional promotions. Scarface refers to a facial scar Aldo received as a young child after being injured during an accident, an identifier that stuck locally long before his MMA career began. Neither nickname reflects fighting style. Instead, both serve as personal markers tied to his upbringing. Throughout his UFC tenure, Junior has been the more common and officially recognized of the 2. The Eraser. Paulo Costa's nickname, The Eraser, was created to emphasize his finishing ability during his early career, where he consistently stopped opponents with high-pressure striking. The name refers to the idea of erasing opponents quickly through power, rather than extended technical exchanges. It also aligns with the physical attributes he became known for: forward aggression, heavy combinations, and a physique associated with explosive output. As Costa entered the UFC, The Eraser remained a straightforward description of his offensive style and his reliance on decisive, fight-ending sequences. Nomad. Shavkat Rakhmonov's nickname Nomad reflects the historic lifestyle of the Kazakh people, who traditionally moved across the Central Asian steppe as pastoral nomads. The name wasn't a marketing creation. It developed naturally during his early regional career, where fans and fellow fighters used it to acknowledge his cultural roots. Nomad aligns with the calm, methodical approach Rakhmonov brings to competition: steady pressure, measured pace, and an ability to adapt without appearing rushed. Over time, the nickname has become a core part of his identity, highlighting both national heritage and the composed, systematic style he displays inside the cage. Triple C. Henry Cejudo created the nickname Triple C to highlight a rare combination of achievements: 1 Olympic gold medal and 2 UFC championship titles in different weight classes. The name functions as a results-based identity rather than a stylistic one, emphasizing credentials over personality. Cejudo adopted it intentionally as part of his branding, using the title to reinforce his status as one of the few athletes to succeed at the highest levels in both wrestling and MMA. Over time, Triple C became the central label for his competitive resume and public persona. Cardio Kane. Cain Velasquez earned the nickname Cardio Kane at the American Kickboxing Academy, where coaches quickly noticed how far his conditioning exceeded typical heavyweight standards. In a division known for short bursts and slower pacing, Velasquez routinely pushed through extended grappling rounds, high-volume striking drills, and pressure-heavy scrambles without showing the fatigue most heavyweights experience. Training partners described him as setting an almost middleweight pace, maintaining output that forced others to adjust their tempo just to keep up. The nickname wasn't created for marketing. It came directly from repeated observation of a measurable competitive advantage. Velasquez used this conditioning edge strategically, building his fighting style around constant forward movement, cage pressure, and non-stop transitions that drained opponents over time. As he rose toward the UFC title, Cardio Cane became a precise descriptor of how he separated himself from the division, by weaponizing endurance in a weight class where few could match it, and by sustaining a pace that shaped multiple championship-level performances. The Future. Ian Gary's nickname, The Future, was introduced during his rise in Cage Warriors, where coaches, commentators, and promoters used it to emphasize how far ahead he appeared compared to other prospects his age. The label highlighted his combination of height, reach, striking fundamentals, and confidence, suggesting he had the raw tools to become a long-term presence in the welterweight division. Rather than pointing to a single technical feature, the nickname operates as a projection, framing Gary not by what he had already accomplished, but by the ceiling people believed he could reach. As he transitioned into the UFC with an unbeaten record, The Future became a stable part of his branding, signaling both ambition and expectation. It communicates the idea that his career is defined by upward trajectory, improving fight to fight, adopting a polished media presence, and positioning himself as a marketable contender early in his tenure. The nickname ultimately serves as a forward-looking identity, reinforcing that Gary's value lies in his potential to grow into a championship-level athlete as his technical experience and competitive resume expand.
Padless gloves. In 1983, Luis Resto was involved in the most serious cheating scandal in boxing history. During his fight against Billy Collins Jr., Resto entered the ring with the padding deliberately removed from his gloves. This turned every punch into a more dangerous, damaging blow, far beyond what's legally allowed in the sport. Over the course of 10 rounds, Collins absorbed extreme damage. He suffered broken bones in his face, permanent eye injuries, and career-ending trauma. The gloves were only examined after the fight when Collins' father, also his trainer, noticed they felt unusually thin. This led to an official investigation. The result confirmed the violation. Resto's gloves had been illegally altered, and the New York State Athletic Commission ruled the incident a criminal act, not just a breach of rules. Both Resto and his trainer, Panama Lewis, were convicted of assault and conspiracy. Resto served prison time and was banned from boxing for life. Billy Collins Jr. never fought again. He lost vision in one eye and died less than a year later. His death is widely linked to the psychological and physical damage caused by the fight. It crossed the line from sportsmanship into physical assault and changed how athletic commissions inspect equipment before and after fights. Cement wraps. In 2009, Antonio Margarito was caught attempting to fight with illegal hand wraps before his bout with Shane Mosley. During the pre-fight inspection, Mosley's team noticed something unusual in Margarito's wraps. The California State Athletic Commission ordered them removed and examined. Inside, officials found inserts coated with a plaster-like substance. These inserts were designed to harden as the fight progressed, essentially turning Margarito's fists into blunt weapons. Had the wraps not been discovered, every punch thrown would have carried the force of a cast, significantly increasing the risk of serious injury to his opponent. The wraps were confiscated, Margarito was forced to rewrap his hands legally, and Mosley went on to dominate the fight, stopping Margarito in the 9th round. The scandal immediately raised questions about Margarito's previous performances. Most notably, suspicion turned toward his 2008 win over Miguel Cotto. In that fight, Cotto suffered an unusual amount of facial damage, including excessive swelling and bleeding, leading many to believe Margarito may have used the same illegal wraps. Although there was no official proof that the wraps were used in earlier fights, the damage to Margarito's reputation was irreversible. He was suspended for 1 year by the California State Athletic Commission, and public trust in his legitimacy as a fighter never fully recovered. John Jones. Jones is widely considered the most talented fighter in MMA history, but his legacy is filled with controversy. Alongside title wins and dominant performances, Jones has one of the most documented histories of cheating and rule violations in the sport. His biggest issues involve performance-enhancing drugs. Jones has failed multiple drug tests over the course of his career. In 2016, he tested positive for clomiphene and letrozole, both banned substances. In 2017, he failed another test, this time for turinabol, an anabolic steroid. These violations led to suspensions, stripped titles, and canceled fights. In addition to banned substances, Jones has a long record of rule bending inside the cage. He's known for frequent eye pokes, often using extended fingers to manage distance while risking illegal contact. He regularly targets the knees with oblique kicks, legal but widely viewed as dangerous due to the potential for serious joint injury. These fouls are rarely penalized, but they create small, consistent advantages. Jones has often remained just within the limits of what referees are willing to call, making his rule-breaking difficult difficult to punish in real time. The debate around Jon Jones isn't just about his skill, it's about whether that skill has been consistently aided by cheating, both inside and outside the cage. His career is a clear example of how technical excellence and repeated rule violations can exist at the same time. Vitor Belfort. During the early 2010s, the UFC entered what became known as the TRT era, a period where fighters were allowed to use testosterone replacement therapy under doctors' supervision. The practice was controversial, but technically legal under Athletic Commission exemptions. Vitor Belfort became the most prominent and arguable figure of that era. While on TRT, Belfort showed a dramatic physical transformation. He appeared more muscular, more aggressive, and more explosive than at any other point in his long career. His knockout power increased, and he delivered some of the most violent finishes in UFC history during this time. One of the most discussed examples was his head kick knockout of Michael Bisping in 2013. That kick caused permanent damage to Bisping's eye, eventually requiring him to wear a prosthetic. Although Belfort never technically broke the rules while on TRT, the advantage it gave him was significant. His success during that period raised serious concerns about the use of therapeutic exemptions for performance enhancement. The UFC's decision to ban TRT was largely influenced by the controversy surrounding him. His case remains one of the clearest examples of how regulated substances can still create an uneven playing field in combat sports. Romero Stoolgate. At UFC 178, Yoel Romero faced Tim Kennedy in a high-stakes middleweight bout. The controversy began at the end of round 2, when Kennedy landed a barrage of punches that left Romero visibly stunned and close to being finished. Under normal rules, the fighter must rise from the stool and answer the bell to start the next round. But when round 3 was set to begin, Romero remained seated. His corner deliberately left the stool in the cage and covered him in excess Vaseline, a tactic that forced the officials to pause the fight. The delay lasted 28 seconds beyond the standard 1-minute break between rounds. During that time, Romero recovered. No point was deducted, no disqualification was issued, and the fight continued. Once the third round began, Romero came out fresh and quickly turned the tables, landing punches and finishing Kennedy by TKO. This incident became known as Stoolgate. The win remained on Romero's record, and the UFC never issued formal discipline. The controversy raised ongoing questions about officiating and enforcement in MMA. It also highlighted how subtle rule manipulation, in this case simply sitting for an extra half minute, can have a direct impact on the outcome of a fight. To this day, Stoolgate is considered one of the clearest examples of gamesmanship crossing into rule-breaking with no accountability. Ricardo Mayorga. Ricardo Mayorga is one of the most unorthodox and controversial boxers in modern history, known as much for his fouls as for his fists. While he held world titles in 2 weight classes, his real notoriety came from how he broke the rules, both inside and outside the ring. In the ring, Mayorga consistently used illegal tactics. Low blows were common, often landing without apology. Headbutts, rabbit punches to the back of the head, and hitting after the bell were all part of his approach. He treated rules like suggestions, and many referees struggled to control his behavior. Outside the ring, his conduct was just as chaotic. Mayorga's press conferences and weigh-ins often involved smoking cigarettes on stage, throwing insults, or physically provoking his opponents. He made a spectacle of disrespect, aiming to get into his opponent's head before the first punch was thrown. While some fans found his antics entertaining, most experts agree he represents one of the dirtiest fighters the sport has ever seen. His legacy isn't about technique or discipline. It's about pushing the limits of what a referee would allow and making chaos part of his strategy. Judge coercion. In 2003, Roy Jones Jr. competed in a highly controversial bout against Antonio Tarver. While not a traditional case of equipment tampering or drug use, the controversy centered around manipulation of judging and promotion influence, something that's often overlooked as a form of cheating. Jones, one of boxing's biggest stars at the time, was awarded a majority decision in a fight where many observers believed Tarver had clearly done enough to win. The issue wasn't just about scoring, it was about the systemic bias built into high-level boxing. Promoters, networks, and sanctioning bodies all had financial stakes in keeping Jones on top. Critics pointed to this as an example of institutionalized favoritism, where the house fighter is nearly impossible to beat on the scorecards unless he's knocked out. While no rules were technically broken, the fight fueled distrust in boxing's integrity and highlighted how judicial manipulation can impact the outcome just as much as PEDs, or illegal hand wraps. This wasn't an isolated incident. It represented a pattern where elite fighters sometimes benefit from scoring that protects the business, even if it means robbing the opponent. In many ways, this kind of cheating is harder to detect and punish, but just as damaging to the credibility of the sport. Loaded ankle wraps. In 2016, Charles Bennett, also known as Crazy Horse, was involved in an infamous moment of foul-based cheating during his fight against Minoru Kimura in Japan. Just seconds into the bout, Bennett sprinted across the ring and landed an illegal soccer kick to his downed opponent, clearly against the rules of the promotion. The move caused immediate chaos and controversy. It wasn't accidental or heat of the moment. It was blatant and calculated. Bennett had a long history of pushing the boundaries of legality in the ring, but this fight showed how some fighters weaponize the element of surprise and rule violation to shock opponents, exploit loopholes, or create confusion. While not as long-lasting as steroid use or hand-wrap tampering, this style of chaos-based cheating is dangerous because it normalizes violence outside the rulebook and sometimes gets rewarded by viral attention or crowd support. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. And let me know what other similar content you would like to see down below in the comments. This is every level of UFC fan hatred explained. Level 1. Universally loved. Level 1 is the rarest level in all of MMA. These are fighters that literally everyone loves. You will not find a single person who has anything bad to say about them. They're skilled, they're humble, they're respectful, and they make it impossible to root against them. Alexander Volkanovski is the perfect example of Level 1. Volk is probably the most universally loved fighter in the entire UFC right now, and there's a reason for that. The guy defended the featherweight title 5 times against killers like Max Holloway, Brian Ortega, and Chan Sung Jung. He went up to lightweight and gave Islam Makhachev the toughest fight of his career. And through all of it, he never once talked trash, never disrespected anyone, never made excuses. When Volk loses, he takes it with grace. When he wins, he gives his opponent credit. He's a family man, he's down to earth, and he carries himself like a true professional. Even when he got knocked out by Ilia Topuria, fans didn't turn on him. They felt bad for him. That's how likable Volk is. You will not find a Volk hater. They don't exist. If someone says they hate Volkanovski, they're lying for attention. That's Level 1. Complete and total universal love from every corner of the MMA world. Level 2. Loved by almost everyone. Level 2 is where fighters are loved by the vast majority of fans, but there's a small group who aren't completely on board. Maybe they think the fighter's overrated, maybe they just prefer someone else, but it's not real hatred. It's just mild disagreement. Alex Pereira is the perfect example of Level 2. Poatan is one of the most popular fighters in the UFC right now. The guy's a former kickboxing champion who came into the UFC and became a 2-division champion. He's got one of the most exciting fighting styles in the sport, throwing bombs and knocking people out cold. His story is incredible, and his humble demeanor makes him incredibly likable. But here's the thing. There's a small group of fans who aren't completely sold on Alex. Some people think his grappling is too weak, and that he's been protected from high-level wrestlers. Others think his rise was too fast and that he hasn't fought enough contenders. And then there's the people who are still loyal to Israel Adesanya and haven't forgiven Alex for taking his belt. But those people are the minority. Most fans absolutely love Poatan. His post-fight interviews where he barely speaks English, his iconic bow and arrow celebration, the way he carries himself like a silent assassin, it all works. Level 2 is where you're beloved by most, but not quite universally adored like Level 1. Level 3, mostly liked with a decent-sized opposition. Level 3 is where things start to shift. These fighters are still generally well-liked, but there's a legitimate crowd of fans who actively root against them. It's not 50-50 yet, but it's not overwhelmingly positive either. Islam Makhachev is the perfect example of Level 3. Islam is the current lightweight champion, one of the most dominant fighters in the UFC, and has proven himself against top competition. His grappling is elite, his fight IQ is off the charts, and he's basically carried on Khabib's legacy at lightweight. But here's where the divide happens. There's a crowd of fans who are just tired of the Dagestani dominance. They see Islam as another Khabib clone, another wrestler who's going to lay on people for 5 rounds. Yeah, they want someone to come in and knock him out, break the streak, and bring some excitement back to lightweight. Then there's the people who think Islam hasn't fought enough top strikers, or that he's been protected from certain matchups. And some fans just don't connect with his personality. He's quiet, humble, doesn't talk much trash, and for some people, that's boring. But the majority of hardcore fans still respect Islam. They recognize his skill, his dominance, and his legitimacy as champion. It's just that there's a vocal minority who actively root against him every time he fights. That's Level 3. Mostly liked, but with a decent-sized opposition that's loud enough to make themselves heard. Level 4. Perfectly divided. Level 4 is where fighters are completely split down the middle. Half the fan base loves them, half the fan base hates them. There's no consensus. Every fight they're in becomes a war in the comment sections. Conor McGregor is the perfect example of Level 4, and honestly, he might be the most divisive fighter in UFC history. You either love Conor or you hate him. There's no in between. The people who love Conor see him as the greatest thing to ever happen to MMA. He's a 2-division champion, he changed the sport forever, he brought millions of new fans to the UFC, and his trash talk and charisma are unmatched. They see him as a legend who earned everything he got. The people who hate Conor see him as a loudmouth who hasn't won a fight in years. They point to the Khabib loss, the Dustin losses, and the fact that he spent more time tweeting than training. They see him as a guy who got famous for talking trash and then couldn't back it up when it mattered most. And then there's all the stuff outside the cage, the legal issues, the controversies, the constant drama. But here's the thing, Conor still sells. Whether you love him or hate him, you're tuning in. His fights are the biggest pay-per-views in UFC history. People want to see him win, or they want to see him lose. Either way, they're watching. That's level 4. Perfectly split, 50-50, love him or hate him, no middle ground. Level 5, widely disliked. Level 5 is where the tide has turned. These fighters are disliked by most fans. There's still a loyal group who support them, but the majority of the fan base actively roots against them and talks trash about them online. Israel Adesanya is the perfect example of level 5. And what makes Izzy's case so interesting is that he used to be at level 2 or even level 1. When he first came into the UFC, everyone loved him. He was the anime-loving, flashy striker with incredible skills and a fun personality. He was the people's champion, but somewhere along the way, it all changed. Maybe it was the humping Paulo Costa thing. Maybe it was the cringe comments he made to Robert Whittaker. Maybe it was the boring fights against Yoel Romero and Jared Cannonier where he refused to engage. Or maybe it was just that as the UFC got more mainstream, new fans came in who didn't connect with Izzy's personality. Now Izzy gets copped with slander constantly. People call him cringe, they mock his walkouts, they bring up every weird thing he's ever said or done. When he lost to Sean Strickland, the internet exploded with people celebrating. When he lost to Dricus du Plessis, same thing. The majority of fans actively wanted to see him lose. There's still a group of Izzy fans who defend him, who appreciate his skills and his authenticity, but they're the minority now. Level 5 is where you've gone from beloved to widely disliked, and it's hard to come back from that. Level 6, heavily hated. Level 6 is where fighters are genuinely hated by the vast majority of fans. There's a tiny group of supporters left, but everyone else can't stand them. Every time they fight, social media is filled with people hoping they get knocked out. Ian Garry is the perfect example of level 6. Ian came into the UFC with a lot of hype, an undefeated record, and immediately started getting compared to Conor McGregor because he's Irish and talks trash. But unlike Conor, Ian hasn't earned the respect of the fans. First, there's the whole situation with his wife. Ian's wife Layla is significantly older than him, used to be a TV host, and wrote a book about how to manipulate men. The internet had a field day with that. People started calling Ian controlled, saying his wife runs his life, and it became this whole thing that he couldn't escape. Then there's his fighting style. For a guy who talks a lot of trash, Ian fights extremely safe. He point fights, he doesn't take risks, and his wins aren't exciting. Fans wanted to see him get knocked out against guys like Jeff Neal and Shavkat Rakhmonov, and when he won those fights by decision, it just made people more frustrated. And then there's just his personality. He comes across as fake, like he's trying too hard to be Conor without having the charisma or the resume to back it up. He'll talk trash, then fight boring, then make excuses, and fans are just tired of it. Most fans actively dislike Ian Garry. There's a small group who think he's skilled and has potential, but they're drowned out by the hatred. That's level 6, heavily disliked by almost everyone. Level 7, universally hated. Level 7 is the absolute worst. These are fighters that literally everyone hates. Left-wing fans hate them, right-wing fans hate them, casual fans hate them, hardcore fans hate them. There is no defense for these fighters. They are the ultimate villains of the sport. Colby Covington is the perfect example of level 7. Colby is hated by everyone, and I mean everyone. The only people who claim to like Colby are doing it ironically or because they want to be contrarian. Let's start with why people hate him. Colby built his entire persona around being a MAGA heel, calling people communists, attacking fighters' families and countries. He told Kamaru Usman's coach that he was going to send him back to the streets. He mocked Dustin Poirier's charity work with underprivileged kids in Louisiana. Yet he showed up to a fight wearing a fake championship belt and called himself the people's champ when nobody liked him. But here's what makes Colby level 7 instead of just a regular heel. Even the people who agree with his politics don't actually like him. Why? Because it's so obviously fake. Colby admitted in interviews that he created this character to save his job, that he's not really like this in real life. So the people who might have supported him politically just see him as a phony, using their beliefs as a gimmick. And then there's his fighting. For a guy who talks as much trash as Colby does, he hasn't backed it up when it mattered most. He's 0-3 in undisputed title fights. He lost to Kamaru Usman twice, lost to Leon Edwards, and every time he loses, he makes excuses. He said he had a broken foot, a bad rib, whatever whatever excuse he can come up with. The left hates him for his politics and the things he says. The right hates him because he's clearly using their beliefs as a character. Casuals hate him because he's annoying. Hardcores hate him because he doesn't back it up. His opponents hate him because he attacks their families. Even his former teammate and best friend Jorge Masvidal hates him so much that he assaulted him outside a restaurant. Colby Covington is universally hated. That's level 7. When you can unite every single demographic of MMA fans in their hatred of you, you've reached the absolute peak of being despised. This is every level of cheating in MMA explained. Level 1. Level 1 is the stuff that happens in almost every single fight. These aren't blatant fouls or career-ending controversies. These are the little things fighters do to gain tiny advantages that referees usually let slide. And honestly, if you're not doing at least some level 1 stuff, you're probably losing. Jon Jones is the perfect example of level 1. He's a master at the small stuff that technically breaks the rules but never gets called. The fence grabs, the extended fingers, all of it. Watch any Jon Jones fight, and you'll see him grab the cage to stop takedowns. He does it just long enough to defend, then lets go before the ref can warn him. It's not egregious enough to lose points, but it's enough to change the outcome of an exchange. And those extended fingers? Yeah, Jon does this in literally every fight. His reach is already 84.5 inches, the longest in UFC history, and then he adds another few inches by keeping his fingers pointed straight at his opponent's face. It makes it impossible for guys to close distance without risking getting poked. Technically illegal, but refs rarely do anything about it until after someone actually gets poked. This level of cheating is basically part of the game at this point. Every veteran knows how to bend the rules just enough without breaking them completely. Level 2? Level 2 is where we get into actual rule violations that are clearly intentional, but fighters can still claim they were accidents. These are fouls that happen too consistently to be mistakes, but aren't severe enough to get disqualified. Daniel Cormier is the perfect example of level 2 with his eye pokes. And I'm not talking about 1 or 2 accidental ones. DC poked Stipe Miocic in the eye in both of their first 2 fights. In their second fight at UFC 226, he literally poked Stipe so bad in the first round that Stipe couldn't see properly for the rest of the fight. DC won that fight by knockout in the first round. Then in their third fight, DC poked him again, multiple times. It got so bad that Stipe literally told the ref, "He's eye poking me on purpose." The thing is, DC could always claim it was his stance, at his reach disadvantage making him paw at Stipe's face. But when it happens that many times against the same opponent, in the biggest moments of the biggest fights, it's hard to call it an accident. And the worst part? DC still defends it to this day, saying it's just part of fighting. That's level 2. The fouls are obvious, they affect the outcome, but there's just enough plausible deniability to avoid serious consequences. Level 3. Level 3 is where fighters are doing things that are so obviously illegal that even casual fans watching at home are yelling at the TV. We're talking about fouls that should result in point deductions or disqualifications, but sometimes don't because of incompetent officiating or because the fighter knows exactly how far they can push it. Aljamain Sterling versus Peter Yan at UFC 259 is the perfect example of level 3. In the 4th round, with Sterling clearly losing the fight, Yan was in dominant position with Sterling grounded. His corner literally yelled no when Yan looked like he was thinking about throwing a knee, but Yan threw it anyway. A full-force illegal knee directly to Sterling's head while he had a knee on the canvas. It was one of the most blatant illegal strikes in UFC history. The crazy part? Yan knew the rules. He's a professional fighter. His corner knew the rules and warned him, but he threw it anyway, and it resulted in the first ever UFC title fight decided by disqualification. Sterling became bantamweight champion without winning the fight. What makes this level 3 instead of higher is that it happened in the heat of the moment during the fight. It was blatant, it was intentional, but it wasn't premeditated. Yan made a catastrophic decision in the cage that cost him everything. Level 4. Level 4 is when the cheating extends beyond just the fighter. Now we're talking about corners and coaches actively breaking the rules to help their fighter win. This is premeditated, coordinated cheating that involves multiple people. Khabib Nurmagomedov's corner at UFC 229 is the perfect example of level 4. During his fight with Conor McGregor, Khabib's corner was giving him instructions and coaching between rounds, which is normal. But what wasn't normal was what happened during the actual rounds. His head coach, Javier Mendez, was standing on top of the cage, yelling instructions to Khabib while the fight was happening. Then it got worse. In one of the rounds, Khabib's cornerman, Islam Makhachev, literally applied Vaseline to Khabib's face while the round was still going on. The ref had to stop him. Now, you could argue this was just overzealous cornermen caught up in the moment, but the problem is, these are professionals who know the rules. You can't coach from on top of the cage. You definitely can't touch your fighter while the round is active. When it's the biggest fight in UFC history and your corner is breaking multiple rules to give you advantages, that crosses into level 4 territory. It's coordinated, it's intentional, and it shows a complete disregard for the rules. Level 5. Level 5 is when fighters physically alter something about themselves or their equipment to gain an unfair advantage. This isn't just breaking the rules during a fight. This is showing up to the fight with something that shouldn't be there. Gleison Tibau is the perfect example of level 5, specifically his fight against Khabib in 2012. Now, Tibau never popped for steroids that night, but what he did do was show up absurdly overweight. He weighed in at 155 pounds for the lightweight limit, but by fight time, he weighed over 180 pounds. That's a 25-pound weight advantage. He was basically a welterweight fighting at lightweight. But it gets worse. During the fight, Khabib, who had taken down literally everyone he'd ever fought, couldn't take Tebow down. The guy was too strong, too heavy, too slippery. And that's the other thing. Fighters and corners complained that Tebow was excessively greasy, like he'd lathered himself in so much Vaseline and whatever else that Khabib couldn't get a grip on him. You're supposed to have a thin layer of Vaseline on your face to prevent cuts, not be a greased-up watermelon. Tebow won that fight by decision, and to this day, it's the most controversial fight on Khabib's record. Not because Khabib lost, but because of how Tebow showed up to fight. That's level 5. It's not just rule-breaking, it's physically manipulating the conditions of the fight before it even starts. Level 6. Level 6 is where we get into the really serious stuff. Performance-enhancing drugs, steroids, EPO, testosterone, all of it. This is career-destroying, legacy-tarnishing, illegal substance abuse that completely undermines the integrity of the sport. TJ Dillashaw is the perfect example of level 6. TJ was a former 2-time bantamweight champion, one of the best fighters in the world, known for his incredible cardio and movement. In 2019, he dropped down to flyweight to challenge Henry Cejudo for the title. He got destroyed in 32 seconds. Then, shortly after, news broke that TJ had tested positive for EPO. EPO is one of the worst things you can take in a cardio-heavy sport like MMA. It's a blood booster that increases your red blood cell count, which means you can train harder, recover faster, and have borderline unlimited cardio in fights. It's the same stuff Lance Armstrong used to dominate cycling, and TJ got caught with it in his system. USADA suspended him for 2 years. He was stripped of his title. His legacy was completely destroyed. And the worst part? Nobody knows how long he'd been using it. Was he on EPO during his championship reign? During his wars with Cody Garbrandt? We'll never know. But what we do know is that he cheated at the highest level, got caught, and it cost him everything. That's level 6. It's not just breaking the rules, it's systematically undermining fair competition with substances that give you superhuman advantages. Level 7. Level 7 is the absolute worst, most disgraceful form of cheating in MMA. This is when fighters, coaches, or entire teams engage in coordinated, premeditated criminal behavior to rig fights or gain advantages. We're not just talking about rule violations anymore. We're talking about fraud, assault, and actions that result in criminal investigations. The Luis Peña greasing scandal is a good example, but the ultimate level 7 moment was what happened at Pride FC with the Yakuza involvement. But in modern MMA, the closest we've come is the 2020 scandal involving James Krause and the betting manipulation allegations. James Krause is a veteran UFC fighter and coach who ran a betting service where he'd give tips to his subscribers about upcoming fights. Sounds harmless, right? Wrong. In 2022, a multiple sportsbook suspended betting on a UFC fight involving one of Krause's students, Derek Minner. The reason? Unusual betting patterns. Massive amounts of money were being placed on Minner to lose in the first round. And guess what happened? Minner got submitted in the first round, exactly as the bets predicted. The UFC launched an investigation. The Nevada Athletic Commission got involved. It turned out Krause had inside information, knew his own fighter was injured and likely to lose, and had been telling people to bet against him. The FBI even got involved because of potential wire fraud. Krause was released from the UFC. He was banned from cornering. His entire reputation was destroyed. This wasn't just cheating in a fight. This was potentially rigging the outcome of a fight for financial gain and telling people to bet on it. That's fraud. That's criminal conspiracy. That's level 7. When cheating crosses over from rule violations into actual crimes, when there's federal investigations and potential prison time, that's when you've reached the absolute worst level of cheating in MMA. It's not just about winning anymore. It's about corruption, greed, and destroying the integrity of the entire sport. Every level of physique in the UFC explained. Tier 1. The chopped physiques. Sean Woodson. Sean Woodson's physique is defined by extreme limb length, narrow clavicles, and minimal muscular development, creating a naturally lanky and unfinished look. His shoulders sit close together due to short clavicles, eliminating any hint of a V-taper, while a slightly protruding rib cage becomes visually dominant because his chest and lats lack the mass to cover it. His arms are disproportionately long for his frame, which stretches out whatever muscle he does have and gives him that crane-like silhouette. The lower body follows the same pattern: long femurs, thin quads, and almost no hamstring drop, reinforcing the impression of a body built for reach, not aesthetics. Altogether, the combination of narrow structure, exposed ribcage, elongated limbs, and low muscle density results in a physique that appears functional for range, but visually sits at the far end of the lanky, under-muscled spectrum. Ben Askren. Ben Askren's physique is the textbook definition of skinny fat, built on soft tissue, minimal visible muscle, and a frame that looks almost completely completely untrained despite world-class conditioning. His midsection carries a loose, smooth layer of fat with no abdominal separation, while his chest and shoulders appear flat, giving him a rounded, almost slouched upper body silhouette. His arms are slender with little bicep or tricep shape, and his back lacks the thickness or width usually associated with strength athletes. Yet despite the lack of definition, he maintains surprisingly good cardio, likely because he isn't carrying much muscle mass, which reduces oxygen demand and keeps endurance high. Structurally, the combination of low muscle density, soft fat distribution, and a generally shapeless outline makes Askren the pinnacle of the skinny fat physique, a body that performs far better than it looks but scores at the very bottom in visual aesthetics. Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz's physique is a classic wiry, endurance-focused build with almost no aesthetic muscle development. His narrow clavicles give him tight, compressed shoulders, while his flat chest leaves the ribcage visibly outlined, creating a stretched, underfilled torso. His arms are long and extremely lean but lack noticeable bicep or tricep shape, adding to the string bean look. His back has minimal lat flare or thickness, and his legs follow the same pattern: slim, functional, but visually unimpressive. The one upside is that this low muscle, low mass frame support excellent cardio efficiency, but aesthetically, the combination of narrow structure and minimal hypertrophy places him firmly in the bottom tier. Derek Lewis. Derek Lewis carries a physique built almost entirely on mass rather than muscle, with a thick, heavy frame and high body fat distribution that softens every visible contour. His torso is dominated by a large midsection with little abdominal separation, giving him a rounded, bulky silhouette rather than any defined structure. His chest sits flat and soft, lacking upper body shaping, while his shoulders and arms, though large, have minimal visible muscle separation, creating a blocky rather than aesthetic look. His lower body mirrors the upper, thick legs powered by sheer mass, not sculpted musculature. The overall impression is a body optimized for weight and momentum, rather than visual symmetry or definition. While the size provides stability and force from a physics perspective, aesthetically it ranks near the bottom, heavy, undefined, and closer to a strongman in off-season silhouette than a trained athletic physique. Tai Tuivasa. Tai Tuivasa's physique is a classic soft, mass-heavy dad bod with high body fat and very little visible muscle definition. His midsection is round and protruding with no abdominal separation. His chest sits flat and blends into the torso, and his arms and shoulders, while thick, lack clear shape or taper. His legs are strong but similarly undefined, built more from total body mass than targeted muscle development. The overall look is blocky, heavy, and unrefined, a body built for bulk and impact rather than aesthetics. Tier 2. The decent physiques. Justin Gaethje. Justin Gaethje's physique sits comfortably in the decent category. Not shredded, not soft, just a balanced, functional build with moderate muscular development. He has average width clavicles, giving him a solid but not dramatic shoulder line, and his chest shows mild definition without deep separation. His arms carry respectable size with clear bicep and tricep shaping, though not enough to create a true physique standout look. His midsection is flat, but rarely lean enough to reveal abs, landing him in that middle zone of fit but not aesthetic. His legs are his strongest visual feature, thick quads and sturdy calves that give him a grounded, athletic base. Overall, Gaethje has a physique that looks trained and capable, but not sculpted. Balanced proportions, moderate mass, and a look that signals athleticism without ever approaching standout aesthetics. Brandon Moreno. Brandon Moreno has a clean, athletic-looking physique with enough definition to look fit, but not enough mass to be considered impressive. His narrow to average clavicles give him a compact shoulder frame, and his chest is modest with light definition. His arms are lean with visible shape, though not particularly large, and his midsection often shows faint abs without being fully cut. His legs are proportionate and well-conditioned, matching the rest of his frame. Overall, Moreno's build is balanced, functional, and aesthetically tidy, a solid, decent physique without any standout muscular features. Sergey Spivak. Sergey Spivak has a physique that falls right in the middle ground. Not shredded, not sloppy, just a solid, workman-like build. He carries broad clavicles that give him naturally wide shoulders, even though his delts aren't highly developed. His chest is thick but not defined, giving him a sturdy upper body look rather than an aesthetic one. His midsection is soft but stable, with a layer of body fat that smooths out any abdominal lines while still showing he's in functional shape. His arms and back have noticeable size without sharp separation, and his legs are heavy and well built, especially through the quads. Overall, Spivak's physique reads as strong, durable, and naturally big, visually above the bad tier, but not sculpted enough for anything higher than decent. Steve Erceg. Steve Erceg has has a naturally athletic, clean-looking physique with moderate definition and modest muscle mass. His slightly narrow clavicles give him a compact shoulder frame, but his delts add enough shape to keep the upper body balanced. His chest is lean with light development, and his arms are slim but clearly conditioned. His midsection is one of his better features, generally flat with visible ab lines when he's on weight. His legs are proportionate and functional, matching the rest of his frame. Overall, Erkeg looks fit and well-conditioned, but not muscular enough to climb out of the decent tier. Tier 3. The physiques which make you say, wow. Paulo Costa. Paulo Costa has one of the most aesthetic physiques ever seen in combat sports. Thick, dense muscle with bodybuilding-level proportions. He has very wide clavicles, giving him a dramatic shoulder span, and his delts, chest, and upper back all have deep, round development that creates a true V-taper. His arms are large and full with clear separation, and his torso shows thick obliques and sharply defined abs that sit on a naturally wide frame. His legs are equally developed, big quads, solid hamstrings, and calves that match the rest of his mass. Costa's physique combines high muscle volume, low body fat, and excellent proportions, giving him a look that would stand out even on a fitness stage. Easily, very impressive by any standard. Francis Ngannou. Francis Ngannou has a physique built on raw mass and bone structure, a naturally gigantic frame with muscle layered on top of it. His clavicles are extremely wide, creating huge shoulder breadth even before accounting for his delts, which are thick and round. His chest is enormous with dense upper pec development, and his back is one of the widest in heavyweight history, giving him a naturally imposing silhouette. His arms are long but heavily muscled, with significant tricep and forearm mass, and his midsection, while not shredded, stays tight enough to look powerful rather than bulky. His legs are huge and structurally dense, built from years of natural strength rather than isolation training. Ngannou's physique is impressive not for definition, but for scale, density, and genetic horsepower. He simply looks engineered for power. Yoel Romero. Yoel Romero has a physique that looks almost superhuman. Extreme muscle density, razor-sharp definition, and proportions that resemble a competitive bodybuilder more than a fighter. He has broad clavicles, giving him massive shoulder width, and his delts are round and capped in all directions. His chest is thick and sculpted, his traps dominate the upper frame, and his lats create a dramatic V-shape that narrows sharply into a tight waist. His arms are heavily muscled with deep separation, and his midsection is famously carved. Thick, cubic abs that look photoshopped in real life. His legs match the upper body with dense quads, visible striations, and powerful hamstrings. Romero's physique isn't just impressive, it's elite, genetically gifted, and arguably one of the most striking natural builds ever seen in professional fighting. Tier 4. The medal for the one guy in the UFC who looked superhuman. Alistair Overeem. Prime Alistair Overeem had a physique so extreme, it pushed past impressive and into outright superhuman territory. His exceptionally wide clavicles gave him enormous shoulder breadth, while his delts and traps sat on his frame like sculpted armor, creating one of the most intimidating upper body silhouettes in combat sports. His chest was thick and full, his lats flared dramatically into a sharp V-taper, and his arms carried both size and separation that wouldn't look out of place on a competitive bodybuilder. Even at heavyweight, his midsection stayed tight with visible abs, and his legs were massive. Sweeping quads, dense hamstrings, and full calves that completed a perfectly balanced, high-mass build. It's also widely assumed that during the less tested era of MMA, Overeem was running significant PED cycles, and that undoubtedly contributed to the sheer size he carried. But even with that context, the structure, proportions, and muscle density he showcased were far beyond what drugs alone produce. He remains one of the only fighters whose physique truly earns the label superhuman. Every UFC fan base ranked from cringe to cold. Tier 1. Cringe. Israel Adesanya fans. Israel Adesanya fans are anime geeks who relate everything back to Naruto references and cringe roleplay energy. Every single thing Izzy does gets compared to some anime character or plotline. It's exhausting. They cling desperately to his one win against Alex Pereira like it's the greatest achievement in UFC history, conveniently ignoring the 3 losses that came before. They act like that first win erased everything else. The worst part is how they defend his questionable celebrations and zesty behavior unquestioningly. Doesn't matter what he does, they'll find a way to justify it or claim everyone else is a hater. The delusion level is off the charts. They genuinely think Izzy is still unbeatable despite clear evidence showing he's been figured out. Every time he loses, they have the victim mentality ready. It's never his fault. It's the judges, the opponent cheated, the game plan was wrong, anything but accepting reality. They flood comment sections with anime edits and cope paragraphs. Their knowledge is surface level at best. They're attracted to his personality and the theatrics, not actual fight analysis or understanding of technique. Israel Adesanya fans are cringe tier because they defend everything blindly and refuse to accept reality when it's right in front of them. Sean Strickland fans. Sean Strickland fans are far-right rednecks with huge mouths who think volume equals truth. They confuse talking non-stop with actual insight. In their minds, if you say something loud enough and confidently enough, it becomes fact. They have high opinions with low literacy, confident takes with shallow understanding of what's actually happening in the octagon. They follow vibes, quotes, and rants over actual fight analysis. They don't care about technique, game planning, or fighting IQ. They just want to hear Strickland say something outrageous at a press conference and then repeat it to their friends like it's gospel. They love him purely for saying controversial things, not for his fighting skill. If you actually watch his fights, most of them are boring point fighting decisions, nothing exciting. But they ignore that completely. They treat MMA as a political statement instead of a sport. Culture war nonsense matters more to them than what happens in the cage. They care more about what Strickland says on podcasts than whether he's actually an elite fighter. Sean Strickland fans are cringe tier because they care more about his mouth than his actual fights and use him as a vessel for their own grievances instead of appreciating mixed martial arts. Khabib Nurmagomedov fans. Khabib fans think they're straight from Dagestan after watching a few embedded episodes. They start talking about wrestling, discipline, and smesh like they grew up in the mountains, training since age 5. They cling to his perfect 29-0 record for dear life whenever GOAT debates come up. That's their only argument. Undefeated. They scream it over and over like it settles everything. Here's the reality. Most Khabib fans are not that knowledgeable about MMA. They only know him because Conor McGregor put him on the map. They heard of Khabib after UFC 299, not before. But now they act like lifelong fans who've been following since his early UFC days. Pure recency bias. They think an undefeated record alone makes him the undisputed GOAT, ignoring strength of schedule, level of competition, and actual resume compared to other legends. They have zero context. They don't understand the nuances of GOAT debates. They just know 9-0 and they repeat it endlessly. Most of them jumped on the bandwagon after the Conor fight and weren't there for the early grinding years. Khabib fans are cringe tier because they're casuals pretending to be hardcore fans with one talking point they beat to death. Paddy Pimblett fans. Paddy Pimblett fans are the TikTok generation. Their entire MMA intake comes from short-form content. Highlights over full fights, always. They've seen a few TikTok edits about Scousers not being knocked out, and now, without ever watching him actually fight, they tell their friends he's their favorite fighter. They haven't seen a single full Paddy fight, not one, but they'll argue with you about how good he is. This is uninformed loyalty at its peak. They think he's elite based purely on social media presence. They actually believe the hype because that's all they've been fed by the algorithm. They ignore questionable judging decisions, bad performances, and his weight issues. None of that matters because TikTok told them Paddy's the guy. This is pure bandwagon energy. They're here for the rise, and they'll be gone the moment reality checks arrive. The second Paddy loses to a real contender, they'll move on to whoever the algorithm promotes next. They're the perfect example of new era casual fans with zero actual knowledge of the sport. Paddy Pimblett fans are cringe tier because their loyalty is based entirely on TikTok edits, not actual fighting ability or understanding of mixed martial arts. Tier 2, casuals. Alex Pereira fans. Alex Pereira fans got funneled into the UFC straight off TikTok and Instagram reels. The algorithm showed them a knockout, then another, and now they think they're MMA fans. They heard Pereira say Chama one time, and now they can't stop repeating it. Every comment section, every conversation, Chama this, Chama that, it's become their entire personality. These fans have little to no actual UFC knowledge. They only like Pereira because social media likes him. The algorithm decided he's popular, so they followed. And now they think he's already the greatest of all time after a handful of fights. They genuinely believe he's the GOAT. No understanding of resumes, longevity, competition level, just recency bias and hype. They only care about his last few knockouts. They can't name his opponents before the UFC. They don't understand his actual skill set or fighting style beyond he knocks people out. It's surface level appeal. They're attracted to highlight reel finishes, not actual fighting IQ or technical skill. Alex Pereira fans are casual tier because they're algorithm-fed fans with zero depth of knowledge who will disappear the moment the hype dies. Conor McGregor fans. Conor McGregor fans heard their dad say his name one time 7 years ago, and now they tell everyone they watched all his original fights. It's a complete lie. They never watched those fights. Most of them have never watched a full UFC event in their entire lives. They just know the name because Conor is the most famous fighter in the world. They only know him from name recognition, not because they actually follow the sport. A lot of them are still stuck in 2016. They genuinely think he's still a current champion. They have no idea about his recent reality. The losses, the inactivity, the decline. None of it registered because they don't actually watch. Conor fans are the perfect marker of someone who doesn't actually watch MMA. They rep the biggest name game without any knowledge of the sport itself. They were fans when he was winning, and went completely silent during his losing streak. Pure bandwagon legacy fans. Conor McGregor fans are casual tier because they represent the name without ever actually watching the sport or understanding what makes fighting great. Charles Oliveira fans. Let me start by saying Charles Oliveira is an incredible fighter. I love watching him compete, but his fan base is insufferable. They see the algorithm flooding with Charles content and instantly jump on the bandwagon. They weren't there during his early UFC struggles. They showed up during the title run when it became cool to be a Charles fan. The second you try to have any legitimate criticism or discussion, they bring up the fact that Charles has the most submissions in UFC history. That's their argument. One stat. They repeat it like it settles everything. They ignore context. They ignore his 5 losses. They ignore his overall record that tells a much more complete story about the fighter he actually is. They cherry-pick the submission stat and act like it makes him unquestionable. They overrate his current ability and refuse to accept any legitimate criticisms about his game. It's all glaze all the time. They're bandwagon fans who showed up late and act like day ones. Charles Oliveira fans are casual tier because they're recency-biased bandwagoners with selective stat knowledge who can't handle nuanced discussion about their fighter. Tier 3. Legends. Tony Ferguson fans. Tony Ferguson fans are different. Even though Tony's fanbase actually grew through social media as he started losing, anyone who genuinely supports Tony usually knows what they're talking about. These are real fans. They're often very OG to the UFC. They were there in the times before the UFC completely took over mainstream culture. The loyalty timing matters here. A lot of fan bases grow when a fighter is winning. Tony's grew as he declined, which shows these people actually appreciate the fighter, not just the wins. They understand his skill, his creativity, his completely unorthodox style that doesn't fit any mold. They can discuss his fighting IQ and technique with actual insight. They respect him through the decline. They don't abandon him when things get rough. That's real support. They appreciate what he brought to the sport during his peak, and they still show up even when it's hard to watch. Tony Ferguson fans are legend tier because they're real fans with deep knowledge and loyalty that goes beyond just wins and losses. Alexander Volkanovski fans. Alexander Volkanovski doesn't really have one defined fan base because everyone just loves him. It's genuinely hard to find anything wrong with anyone who supports Volk. His fans are never too loud. They never glaze too hard. They have a balanced perspective on his career and his abilities. They only want the best for Volk himself. They're not using him to make some larger point or to feel superior to other fans. They're just genuinely rooting for a great fighter and a great person. The knowledge base is typically solid. These are well-informed fans who appreciate technical excellence and understand what makes Volk special. They embody the same values of respect and professionalism that Volk himself carries. There's no toxicity. The fanbase lacks all the annoying characteristics you see in other groups. No excuses when he loses. No overreactions when he wins. Just respect for the sport and the fighter. Alexander Volkanovski fans are legend tier because they're real fans who appreciate greatness without being obnoxious about it. Tier 4. Cold. Georges St-Pierre fans. Georges St-Pierre fans are the realest in the game. These are very OG fans, often massive longtime UFC supporters with deep knowledge of the sport's history. They've been around forever. They watched GSP build his legacy, fight by fight, and they understand what greatness actually looks like over a sustained period. They hold similar values of respect and humbleness as GSP himself. If you meet a GSP fan, you're probably meeting someone who understands fighting at the highest level. They appreciate technical mastery. They understand game planning, strategy, evolution, adaptation. They've seen the sport grow and change through multiple eras. These fans are never disrespectful. They're always measured in their takes. They embody martial arts values, not just fighting fan values. They set the example for what MMA fandom should actually look like. Respectful, knowledgeable, appreciative of skill, regardless of who's displaying it. They've been around through the evolution of the sport, and they bring that perspective to every discussion. Georges St-Pierre fans are cold tier because they represent everything that's right about MMA fandom. Real knowledge, real respect, real appreciation for the art. Whatever UFC fighter needs right now. Justin Gaethje, the unification fight. Gaethje just won the interim lightweight title over Paddy Pimblett at UFC 324. And at 36 years old, this is it. This is his last real shot at becoming an undisputed champion. He's held interim gold before, he's held the BMF title, but undisputed has always slipped away. Ilia Topuria is sitting on the real belt, reportedly on some kind of leave of absence, and Gaethje needs that fight booked immediately, not in 6 months, not after another defense. Now. Every month that passes is a month his body gets older and his window gets smaller. The violence will always be there, the opportunity won't. Paddy Paddy Pimblett, humility and a bounce-back fight. Paddy talked himself into a title shot, and to his credit, he earned it by stopping Michael Chandler. But Gaethje showed him what championship level really looks like over 5 rounds. The loss wasn't embarrassing. It was educational. What Paddy needs now is to take the lessons from that fight, stop pretending he's already arrived, and go beat someone like Dan Hooker to prove he belongs in the title picture. He's only 30. He has time. But the delusion has to die for the real contender to emerge, Ilia Topuria, to come back and defend his belt. Topuria is 17 and, he knocked out Volkanovski. He knocked out Holloway. He went up to lightweight and knocked out Charles Oliveira in under 3 minutes. The man is a problem at any weight class, but he's reportedly on leave of absence, and the longer he sits out, the more the division stalls around him. What Topuria needs is to unify with Gaethje and then give the fans what they've been begging for: Islam Makhachev, the super fight that would determine the best fighter on the planet. Everything else is just waiting. Islam Makhachev, a real challenge. Islam is the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, and it's not particularly close. He vacated the lightweight title after cleaning out the division, and went up to welterweight where he dominated Jack Della Maddalena to become a 2-division champion, 16-fight win streak, tied with Anderson Silva for the UFC record. What Islam needs is someone who can actually push him, because right now he's making elite fighters look like they don't belong in the same cage. The Topuria fight is the only matchup that excites anyone. Ian Gary is being mentioned as the next welterweight challenger, but let's be honest, everyone wants Topuria. Arman Sarukian, a promotion that actually rewards winning. Arman has beaten everyone they put in front of him. He submitted Dan Hooker, he beat Charles Oliveira. He was supposed to fight Islam for the title at UFC 311 and had to pull out the day before due to injury. Since then, he's been stuck in contender limbo while the division reshuffles around Topuria and the interim situation. What Arman needs is simple: a title shot. He's earned it multiple times over. The only thing standing in his way is bad timing and a promotion that keeps finding reasons to make him wait. Tom Aspinall, a clean title defense. Aspinall is the undisputed heavyweight champion, but he still hasn't had a definitive title defense since being elevated. The Cyril Gane fight at UFC 321 ended in a no contest after an eye poke in the first round. Before that, he was the interim champion waiting for a John Jones fight that never happened. What Tom needs is to run it back with Gane, finish him properly, and start building the reign he's been denied. He's possibly the most skilled heavyweight in UFC history. The resume needs to catch up to the talent. Khamzat Chimaev. Consistency. Khamzat finally got his title shot and delivered one of the most dominant performances in championship history. He beat Dricus du Plessis 50-44 on all 3 scorecards. That's not a win. That's a mauling. What Khamzat needs now is to stay healthy and defend regularly. His biggest enemy has always been his own body, the chronic health issues, the weight-cutting problems, the mysterious illnesses that have derailed momentum before. If he can string together 2 or 3 defenses without drama, he climbs to #1 pound for pound. The talent was never the question. The availability was. Dricus du Plessis, time and the right matchups. Dricus went from champion to getting absolutely dominated in his first defense. The Chimaev loss was so one-sided that a rematch makes no sense anytime soon. What Dricus needs is to accept that the belt is gone, take 2 or 3 fights against opponents who aren't elite wrestlers, and rebuild his confidence before trying to get back to the title. He's still dangerous. He's still a former champion. But the path back is longer now than it was a year ago. Peter Yan, to keep what he reclaimed. Yan completed one of the greatest redemption arcs in UFC history. He went from losing the bantamweight title in embarrassing fashion to going 1-4 over 2 years to climbing all the way back and beating Merab Dvalishvili for the belt at UFC 323. What Peter needs now is successful defenses. Stack them up. Prove the redemption wasn't a fluke. The skills were never gone. The belief was. Now he has both back, and the division should be terrified. Umar Nurmagomedov, one more statement win. Umar lost his title shot to Merab Dvalishvili at UFC 311. It was his first career loss, and it hurt. But he's bounced back with wins over Mario Bautista and Davison Figueiredo. And now with Peter Yan holding the belt instead of Merab, the path back looks different. What Umar needs is one more big win to get back in the title conversation. A potential Yan versus Umar fight would be massive for Russian MMA and for the Nurmagomedov family legacy. The talent is there. The opportunity is coming. Alexander Volkanovski, fresh challengers. Volk lost his featherweight title to Topuria, and then watched Topuria vacate to move up. He won the vacant belt back by beating Diego Lopes twice. At 37, he's still the featherweight champion, but he's beaten everyone there is to beat. What Volkanovski needs is the Movsar Evloev fight. Evloev is 19, and the #1 contender, and the only fresh challenge left at the top of the division. If Volk can beat the undefeated contender, he cements himself as the greatest featherweight ever. If he can't, the division finally moves on. Diego Lopes, to stop fighting Alexander Volkanovski. Diego lost to Volk twice in a row, both title fights, both clear decisions. The matchup doesn't work for him, and running it back a 3rd time would be insane. What Diego needs is a different path forward. The Yair Rodriguez beef is real. That's the fight that makes sense. A win over Yair rebuilds momentum, puts him back in contention, and gets him away from the guy who's figured him out. Sometimes you have to go sideways before you can go up. Movsar Evloev, to beat Lerone Murphy and finally get his shot. Evloev is 19 and has been the #1 contender for what feels like forever. He missed all of 2025 due to injury, and the division moved on without him. What he needs is to win at UFC London in March, prove he's still the rightful next challenger, and get the Volkanovski fight while Volk is still champion. Any slip up now and he's back to the end of the line. The undefeated record means nothing if you never fight for the title. Shavkat Rakhmonov, his knee to heal. Shavkat was supposed to be the next welterweight champion, 19-0. Finished his first 18 opponents, the most dangerous contender in the division, and now he's out for 9 months after another knee surgery. This is his second straight year lost to injury. What Shavkat needs is time, patience, and a body that cooperates. The title will still be there when he comes back, but every month on the sidelines is a month where someone else might take his spot. Michael Morales, a top 5 fight. Morales is 19-0 and has knocked out Gilbert Burns, Sean Brady, and Neil Magny in his last 3 fights. All first-round finishes. He's 25 years old with power that translates to any opponent. What he needs is someone in the top 5 to actually accept the fight. With Rakhmonov injured, Morales could leapfrog straight into title contention if he gets one more big win. The UFC needs to give him the opportunity before he ages out of prospect status. Ian Machado Gary, the biggest fight of his career. Gary lost to Rakhmonov in his first defeat, then bounced back by beating former champion Bilal Muhammad. Now he's being mentioned as the next challenger for Islam Makhachev's welterweight title. What Ian needs is to take that fight and shock the world. A win over the #1 pound-for-pound fighter would transform him from polarizing prospect to legitimate superstar overnight. The opportunity is there. The question is whether he can take it. Sean Strickland, a win and a new path to the title. Strickland is 0-2 against Dricus du Plessis, and now Dricus isn't even the champion anymore. Chimaev is. What Sean needs is to beat Anthony Hernandez in February and then figure out how to get a shot at a champion who might be even worse for him stylistically than Dricus was. The wrestling problem isn't going away. At some point he either fixes it or accepts that his title reign was a one-time thing. Israel Adesanya, to remember who he is. Izzy has lost 3 of his last 4 fights. Strickland outpointed him. Du Plessis submitted him. Imavov stopped him. The aura of invincibility that made him one of the most feared strikers in UFC history is gone. What Adesanya needs is to dominate Joe Pyfer in March and start the slow process of rebuilding. Not for a title shot, for his own confidence. The conversation has shifted from whether he's the best to whether he should retire. Only he can shift it back. John Jones, to make a decision. Jones says he wants to fight Alex Pereira at some White House event in June. He also revealed he needs a hip replacement and already qualifies for the surgery. At 38 years old with a body that's breaking down, what John needs is clarity. Fight Pereira and add one more legendary win to the resume. Or retire and stop teasing comebacks that may never happen. The Aspinall fight that everyone wanted is never coming. At some point, the GOAT conversation becomes about what he did, not what he might still do. Charles Oliveira, the BMF title and one more run. Oliveira lost to Topuria in brutal fashion. First round knockout, but he bounced back by submitting Gamrot in Brazil, and now he's fighting Max Holloway for the BMF title at UFC 326 in March. What Charles needs is to win that fight and use the momentum to get one more crack at the lightweight title. He's 35 with the most finishes in UFC history. The window is closing. A win over Holloway might be the last thing he needs to get there. Max Holloway, to defend the BMF belt and cement his lightweight legacy. Max has found his lane. He's not beating Topuria. He's not going back to featherweight to fight Volkanovski again. The BMF title is his, and the Oliveira fight is the perfect showcase for what he does best. Stand in the middle of the octagon and throw hands with another legend. What Max needs is to win that fight and keep defending until they give him a super fight worth taking. A McGregor rematch at the White House has been mentioned. That would be the perfect ending. Sean O'Malley, to rebuild one fight at a time. O'Malley lost to Merab Dvalishvili twice. The wrestling puzzle was never going to be solved, but now Peter Yan is the champion instead of Merab, and suddenly the path back to the title looks different. What Sean needs is to stop worrying about the belt and start stacking wins. He just beat Song Yadong, get another one, then another. The style matchup against Yan is much better than it ever was against Merab. The title will come back around if he's patient. Conor McGregor, to actually show up. It's been almost 5 years since Conor McGregor fought in the UFC. 5 years of callouts, 5 years of press conferences, 5 years of promised returns that never happened. The Chandler fight has been teased so many times that it's become a punchline. What Conor needs is to step into the octagon against anyone and prove he's still a fighter. The longer he waits, the less anyone cares. At 37, with no fight since 2021, the mystique is gone. All that's left is the question of whether he'll ever come back at all. Michael Chandler, to accept reality and move on. Chandler wasted the best years of his career waiting for a McGregor fight that never came. He lost to Oliveira. He got knocked out by Paddy Pimblett. He's 38 years old with 4 losses in his last 5 fights. What Michael needs is to stop chasing the payday and start fighting whoever is available while he still can. The gatekeeper role isn't glamorous, but it's honest work. The alternative is watching the sport pass him by while he waits for a ghost who's never showing up. Kutlaba's controversial rope-a-dope tactic. UFC Fight Night 169 in March. 2020 featured Ion Kutalaba versus Magomed Ankalaev in a light heavyweight bout that became one of the strangest moments in UFC history. From the opening bell, Kutalaba came out with wild, erratic movement and exaggerated reactions to strikes. He was stumbling, wobbling dramatically after getting touched, acting hurt when he clearly wasn't. The tactic was intentional. Kutalaba was trying to bait Ankalaev into overcommitting so he could land a counter, but referee Kevin McDonald interpreted those movements as genuine damage and stopped the fight at just 38 seconds. Kutalaba protested immediately, demonstrating complete coherence and proving he wasn't actually hurt. But it didn't matter. The fight was over. His strategy backfired catastrophically because referees are trained to protect fighters showing signs of being compromised. The stoppage was so controversial, the UFC immediately booked a rematch rematch 2 months later, which ended in a split draw. The lesson is clear. You can't protest your way out of a stoppage once it's official, and simulating damage is incredibly risky. UFC 279. Rodriguez vs. Ribas early stoppage. UFC 279 in September 2022 featured a strawweight bout that ended in one of the most controversial early stoppages in recent memory. The fight was competitive, with both fighters having success and exchanging positions. Then the referee stepped in and stopped it, while one fighter was still actively defending. She immediately protested, demonstrating consciousness and capability to continue. She was covering up but also moving, posting, turning her hips, and attempting escapes. All indicators of intelligent defense. Early stoppages rob fighters of recovery opportunities and alter careers unjustly. They affect rankings, pay, future matchmaking, and trajectory in the organization. When a fight is competitive and both athletes are engaged, stopping it prematurely is a failure of officiating. The MMA community widely criticized the decision, questioning consistency in UFC officiating standards. Referees have an incredibly difficult job making split-second, irreversible decisions, but when a stoppage happens too early in a competitive fight, it damages the sport's credibility and the fighter's livelihood without justification. Lawler vs. Koscheck. Late stoppage. UFC on Fox 3 in May 2012 featured Robbie Lawler vs. Josh Koscheck in a welterweight bout that became a textbook example of waiting far too long to stop a fight. Early in the first round, Lawler dropped Koscheck with a devastating combination and followed to the ground. What happened next was a brutal, one-sided beating. Koscheck's face swelled immediately, his eye was compromised, and he was taking repeated, unanswered strikes while offering minimal defensive response. The outcome was decided. Everyone watching knew it was over, but the referee let it continue. When the fight finally stopped, Koscheck had suffered a fractured orbital bone and severe facial trauma, requiring surgery and months of recovery. None of that additional damage changed the result. The continuation served no competitive purpose, only added injury. This is the danger of late stoppages. They put entertainment over safety. The referee's primary responsibility is protecting fighters, and when someone is taking unanswered damage with the fight clearly decided, it needs to end immediately. Mir breaking Nogueira's arm. UFC 140 in December 2011 featured Frank Mir versus Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira, a fight that raised serious questions about referee intervention and fighter safety. Nogueira was a Brazilian jiu-jitsu legend known for incredible toughness and refusing to tap to submissions. That toughness defined him, but in this fight, it destroyed him. Mir secured a Kimura on Nogueira's arm, applying full pressure and torquing the shoulder joint. The submission was locked with no escape, but Nogueira refused to tap. Mir kept applying pressure, and then an audible snap echoed through the arena. Mir had broken Nogueira's arm before the referee intervened. The submission was fully locked with zero chance of escape, and the referee should have stopped it before permanent damage occurred. Nogueira required surgery and extensive rehabilitation with lasting damage to his arm. This raised a critical question. Should referees protect fighters from themselves when refusing to tap becomes self-destructive? The answer should be yes. Fighter safety must override warrior mentality. Velasquez vs. Dos Santos. First UFC on Fox 1 in November 2011 featured the heavyweight title fight between Cain Velasquez and Junior Dos Santos on network television. Just over 1 minute into the fight, Dos Santos landed a massive overhand right that dropped Velasquez and potentially caused brief unconsciousness. Instead of stopping the fight after the clear knockdown, the referee allowed it to continue with Dos Santos falling to the ground. Velasquez was clearly rocked and took additional strikes while not fully recovered from the initial knockout blow. The fight finally stopped on the ground, but only after more unnecessary damage in a defenseless state. The outcome was already decided on the feet. The ground continuation meant additional brain trauma without changing the result. This raised questions about when a fight is clearly over and whether allowing it to continue serves any purpose beyond added damage. The extended beating potentially affected Velasquez's recovery and preparation for their eventual rematch. When a knockout blow has already landed and the fight is decided, continuation only increases risk without competitive justification. Paul Daly's UFC exit UFC 113 in May 2010 featured Josh Koscheck versus Paul Daly in a welterweight bout. Koscheck won a clear, unanimous decision using a wrestling-heavy game plan that completely neutralized Daly's striking. Daly was visibly frustrated throughout the fight by his inability to land strikes against Koscheck's control-oriented approach. After the final bell rang and the fight officially ended, Daly threw a punch at Koscheck during the referee's separation. A sucker punch after the fight was over. Dana White immediately cut Daly from the UFC, stating he would never fight in the organization again. It was a permanent ban. Daly destroyed a promising UFC career and significant earning potential in one moment of emotional loss of control. He was a dangerous striker with knockout power who could have become a contender, but he threw it all away instantly. Unlike other fighters who've been cut and eventually returned, Daly's ban has remained absolute with no path back despite years passing. One moment of unprofessionalism ended everything he'd worked for. Trading trading Demetrius Johnson for Ben Askren. In October 2018, the UFC traded flyweight champion Demetrius Johnson to one championship in exchange for welterweight Ben Askren. Johnson had 11 consecutive title defenses and held the record for the longest title reign in UFC history. He was the most dominant flyweight ever. The UFC's reasoning was that the flyweight division lacked mainstream appeal, and Johnson's pay-per-view numbers were low despite his absolute dominance. They wanted Askren, an undefeated welterweight they believed would shake up the division. The results were catastrophic for the UFC. Johnson thrived in one championship, becoming a champion and proving his greatness continued. Askren went 1-2 in the UFC before retiring, suffering the fastest knockout in UFC history against Jorge Masvidal and losing to Demian Maia. The UFC traded a pound-for-pound all-time great for a fighter who lasted 3 fights. They nearly eliminated the flyweight division entirely, then had to bring it back. Johnson is now universally recognized as one of the greatest fighters ever, making this trade look worse every year. Crossing Dana White. Dana White controls fighter opportunities, matchmaking, promotional support, and career trajectory within the UFC. Fighters who publicly criticize White, UFC business practices, or contradict company narratives often face measurable career consequences. The pattern is consistent: reduced promotional support, harder matchups, title shot delays, extended layoffs between fights, or outright release despite having competitive records. Notable examples include Nate Diaz's prolonged layoffs after contract disputes, Francis Ngannou's eventual departure following difficult negotiations, and John Fitch's release after sponsorship disagreements. Fighters criticizing pay structure, sponsorship deals, or healthcare often find themselves in significantly less favorable positions afterward. Regardless of being right about the issues, publicly antagonizing the person controlling your career opportunities rarely ends well. Fighters who navigate relationships diplomatically while still advocating for themselves tend to have longer, more lucrative, and more successful careers. This highlights the structural power imbalance between fighters and the promotion, and explains why meaningful fighter advocacy remains difficult in the current UFC system. Speaking out might be principled, but it often costs more than it gains. Francis Ngannou. Francis Ngannou was the UFC heavyweight champion and one of the most terrifying knockout artists in MMA history. The conflict with Dana started during contract negotiations when Ngannou wanted boxer-level pay, the right to box on the side, and health insurance for fighters. Dana refused, publicly downplayed Ngannou's star power, and repeatedly said he didn't deserve what he was asking for. The tension escalated when Ngannou won the title and still wouldn't sign the contract the UFC offered. Dana's frustration became obvious in press conferences where he dismissed Ngannou's demands and compare him unfavorably to other heavyweights. When Ngannou's contract expired in 2023, Dana let him walk instead of meeting his terms. Ngannou left the UFC, signed with PFL for better pay and freedom, and immediately got a boxing match with Tyson Fury, where he nearly won and made more money than his entire UFC career combined. Dana was asked about it and basically said Ngannou made a mistake. The relationship is pure business hatred. Dana hates when fighters have leverage and use it, and Ngannou did exactly that. He proved the UFC wasn't the only path to making money in combat sports, which is the exact message Dana doesn't want getting out to other fighters. Ngannou called the bluff and won, which is why Dana still brings him up negatively whenever asked. Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz has been a problem for Dana White for over a decade, not because of skill, but because of attitude. Diaz constantly complained publicly about pay, called out the UFC's business practices, refused fights he didn't want, and trash-talked Dana directly on social media and in interviews. He didn't play the company game, wouldn't do promotional obligations he thought were stupid, and made it clear he didn't care about being the UFC's model employee. Dana hated that Nate had a massive fan base that gave him leverage to act however he wanted. The conflicts were constant. Nate would go on Twitter and blast the UFC for underpaying fighters, call Dana out by name, and publicly demand better contracts or specific opponents. Dana would fire back in interviews, calling Nate difficult to work with and saying he didn't deserve main events. But every time Nate fought, the pay-per-view numbers were strong, which meant Dana couldn't just cut him. The relationship was mutual disrespect held together by money. When Nate's contract finally ended in 2022, Dana let him go without much of a fight. Nate immediately went to boxing, made millions against Jake Paul, and started his own promotion. Dana downplayed it, but the reality is Nate was one of the most popular fighters in UFC history, and Dana couldn't control him. That loss of control is what Dana hated most. Nate never needed the UFC as much as the UFC wanted to control him. Tito Ortiz. Tito Ortiz was one of the biggest stars in early UFC history, but his relationship with Dana White became one of the most most personal feuds in MMA. The hatred started over money and ego. Tito wanted to be paid like the star he was, and Dana thought Tito overvalued himself. Their public battles were brutal. Dana called Tito stupid in interviews, and Tito fired back, calling Dana a bully and a liar. The bad blood got so personal that they almost had an actual boxing match to settle it, which fell apart when Tito pulled out with an injury. The peak of the hatred was when Tito left the UFC in 2008, trashed Dana in the media, and signed with a rival promotion. Dana went scorched earth, calling Tito washed up, irrelevant, and desperate. When Tito eventually came back to the UFC in 2009, it was uncomfortable for everyone. Dana barely promoted his fights, and the disrespect was obvious. Tito retired in 2012, and Dana made it clear he was happy to see him go. Even years later, Dana still talks about Tito negatively when asked. The hatred isn't just business, it's personal. Tito represented everything Dana hated. A fighter who thought they were bigger than the company, demanded more money than Dana wanted to pay, and publicly challenged his authority. They genuinely dislike each other, and neither has ever pretended otherwise. Randy Couture. Randy Couture was a UFC legend, multi-time champion, and one of the most respected fighters in the sport. The conflict with Dana started in 2007 when Randy publicly resigned from the UFC, citing lack of respect, poor pay compared to what the company was making, and frustration with how the UFC treated fighters. He didn't just leave quietly, he held a press conference and laid out his grievances publicly, which made Dana look bad and gave ammunition to critics of UFC fighter pay. Dana responded aggressively, calling Randy ungrateful and saying he was breaking his contract. The UFC sued Randy to prevent him from fighting elsewhere, and the legal battle dragged on for over a year. Dana trashed Randy in interviews, said he was being manipulated by bad advisors, and made it clear he felt personally betrayed. Randy eventually settled and returned to the UFC in 2008, but the relationship was never the same. Dana stopped promoting him as heavily, and Randy retired in 2011 without much fanfare from the company. The Randy situation was bad for Dana because Randy was respected and credible. When he spoke out about fighter pay and mistreatment, people listened. Dana hated that Randy used his platform to challenge the UFC's business model publicly. Even after Randy came back, the tension was obvious. Dana got what he wanted, Randy back under contract, but he never forgave the public challenge to his authority. Fedor Emelianenko. Fedor Emelianenko is considered by many to be the greatest heavyweight of all time, but he never fought in the UFC, and Dana White has spent nearly 2 decades downplaying his legacy because of it. The UFC tried to sign Fedor multiple times in the late 2000s, but Fedor's management demanded terms Dana wouldn't agree to: co-promotion with his Russian organization, freedom to compete in Sambo, and fighter-friendly contract terms. Dana refused, negotiations fell apart, and Fedor went to fight for rival promotions instead. Dana's response was to trash Fedor publicly whenever possible. He called him overrated, said he was afraid to fight in the UFC, and claimed the only reason people thought Fedor was great was because he fought cans in Japan and Russia. Every time Fedor lost a fight outside the UFC, Dana would bring it up as proof that he was never that good. When the UFC bought Strikeforce and finally had a chance to sign Fedor, he was past his prime, and Dana had no interest. The Fedor hatred is about ego and legacy. Dana needed Fedor in the UFC to legitimize the heavyweight division, and Fedor didn't need the UFC to be considered the best. That independence made Dana furious. Even now, when people bring up Fedor as one of the all-time greats, Dana downplays it and points to his losses. The hatred isn't personal. It's because Fedor represents a legacy outside UFC control, which Dana can't stand. Wanderlei Silva. Wanderlei Silva was a Pride legend who joined the UFC when they bought Pride in 2007. The relationship with Dana was fine at first, but it fell apart when Wanderlei started speaking out about fighter pay, the UFC's treatment of athletes, and the Reebok sponsorship deal that hurt fighters financially. The breaking point came in 2014 when Wanderlei ran from a random drug test, got suspended, and then went on a public media tour trashing Dana and the UFC. He called Dana a coward, said the UFC exploited fighters, and encouraged other fighters to stand up for themselves. Dana's response was nuclear. He called Wanderlei a cheater, said he was irrelevant, and made it clear Wanderlei would never fight in the UFC again. When Wanderlei kept talking, Dana sued him for breach of contract and defamation. The legal battle lasted years, and Dana used every opportunity to trash Wanderlei publicly. Wanderlei eventually apologized and settled, but by then he was out of the UFC permanently and fighting in smaller promotions. The Wanderlei situation was ugly because it was personal and public. Wanderlei didn't just leave quietly. He used his platform to attack the UFC's business practices and called Dana out by name. Dana hates public challenges to his authority, and Wanderlei gave him a big one. The lawsuit was as much about sending a message to other fighters as it was about Wanderlei specifically. Dana won the battle, but the hatred is still there whenever Wanderlei's name comes up. Tyron Woodley. Tyron Woodley was a dominant welterweight champion who held the belt for nearly 3 years, but Dana White never promoted him the way he promoted other champions. The tension started because Tyron was outspoken about race, fighter pay, pay, and what he saw as unfair treatment by the UFC. He'd call out the company publicly, demand title shots he thought he deserved, and complain when the UFC gave promotional priority to white fighters over him. Dana hated the public complaints and the racial angle, and their relationship deteriorated fast. Dana's frustration showed in how he talked about Tyron. He'd call Tyron's fights boring, even when they weren't, downplay his accomplishments, and push other welterweights over him in promotional material. When Tyron lost the belt in 2019, Dana seemed relieved and immediately stopped booking him in high-profile fights. Tyron eventually left the UFC in 2021 and went to boxing, where he fought Jake Paul twice and made more money than most of his UFC title defenses. Dana mocked him for it. The Tyron situation was frustrating for both sides. Tyron felt disrespected and undervalued despite being a dominant champion, and Dana thought Tyron was difficult and ungrateful. The racial component made it messier because Tyron genuinely believed he was treated differently than white champions, and Dana refused to engage with that conversation. The hatred was less personal and more about fundamental disagreement on how Tyron should be valued and promoted. John Fitch was a top welterweight contender in the late 2000s with an incredibly effective but boring wrestling-heavy style. Dana White hated Fitch's fighting style and made no secret of it, regularly trashing him in interviews for being unwilling to engage in exciting fights. The real conflict came in 2008 when the UFC tried to force fighters to sign away their likeness rights for a video game without additional compensation. Fitch refused, and Dana cut him from the UFC entirely as punishment, even though he was ranked in the top 5. The firing caused a massive backlash, and Dana was forced to bring Fitch back a few days later after other fighters threatened to walk. But the relationship was poisoned. Dana never promoted Fitch properly, constantly criticized his style, and eventually cut him again in 2013 after a loss, even though he was still a top 10 fighter. Fitch went to other promotions and continued winning, which made Dana's decision look personal rather than performance-based. The Fitch hatred was about control and entertainment value. Dana wanted fighters who put on exciting shows, and Fitch prioritized winning over entertainment. When Fitch challenged the UFC's authority over likeness rights, Dana made an example of him. It was a clear message to other fighters: do what the company wants or get cut, regardless of your ranking. Fitch represented the kind of fighter Dana didn't want: effective but boring, and willing to push back on unfair contract terms. Yair Rodriguez is a talented featherweight striker who became a problem for Dana White because of his refusal to take fights and his tendency to pull out of scheduled bouts. The conflict started when Yair turned down multiple fight offers in 2017 and 2018, claiming he wanted specific opponents or better positioning. Dana doesn't tolerate fighters turning down fights, and he publicly called Yair out for being difficult and unrealistic about his value. The tension escalated when Dana cut Yair from the UFC in 2018 for refusing a fight with Zabit Magomedsharipov. Yair responded by saying the UFC wasn't offering him fair opportunities and that he was being pressured into bad matchups. Dana fired back, saying Yair was making excuses and that plenty of fighters would take the opportunities he was refusing. The public back and forth made both look bad, but Dana had the power and Yair was out. A few months later, the UFC brought Yair back after he agreed to fight whoever they wanted, but the relationship remained tense. The Yair situation illustrated Dana's philosophy on fighter control. Fighters don't get to pick and choose their opponents or dictate when they fight. The UFC does. Yair tried to have leverage he didn't actually possess, and Dana crushed it. The hatred isn't as deep as with other fighters on this list, but the lesson was clear: play ball or get cut. Yair learned, came back, and has been more cooperative since. But Dana still references him as an example of a difficult fighter when the topic comes up. Demetrius Johnson. Demetrius Johnson was the longest reigning champion in UFC history, defending the flyweight belt 11 consecutive times and widely considered one of the most skilled pound-for-pound fighters ever. The problem was that Dana White never cared about the flyweight division and openly admitted that Mighty Mouse didn't draw pay-per-view numbers the way the UFC wanted. Dana would downplay Johnson's accomplishments in interviews, rarely promoted his fights heavily, and made it clear he thought the lighter weight classes didn't sell compared to heavyweights and welterweights. The frustration was mutual. Johnson felt disrespected by the lack of promotion and the constant narrative that he wasn't a draw despite being dominant and never losing. He'd speak out about it occasionally, but Dana's position never changed. The numbers didn't lie, and flyweight didn't move the needle. The breaking point came in 2018 when the UFC traded Johnson to one championship in exchange for Ben Askren, treating one of their greatest champions like a trading card. Dana acted like he got the better end of the deal, hyping up Askren while barely acknowledging what they gave up. The trade was disrespectful on multiple levels. Johnson was still in his prime, still champion and still unbeaten in years, but Dana wanted him gone because he represented a division that didn't make money. Shipping him to an Asian promotion for a welterweight who hadn't fought in the UFC made it clear star power and marketability mattered more than skill or legacy. Johnson went on to dominate in one championship, and Dana rarely mentions him when talking about UFC greats, which says says everything about how little he valued the flyweight era.